Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to acknowledge before we start that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and thank you for joining us. Also, welcome to Alternate Director Duncan, Alternate Director Goddard, and Alternate Director Manhas. Thanks for joining us. And also, if I could take this opportunity to introduce our new corporate officer to those who haven't met her yet. Miss Angie Legault. She joins us from the Sunshine Coast Regional District. If you can just please welcome Angie. Thank you. I didn't want to tell you to clap, but that was next. Welcome, Miss Legault. So first of all, number one, Miss Legault.
Thank you. The first item of business is the approval of the agenda.
So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you very much. Next is the public input portion. Is there anyone from the public? Oh, who is this coming to the microphone?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, Cliff.
Mr. Chair, on R2, I see you have another satisfaction survey coming up. Every time we have one of those satisfaction surveys come up, my taxes seem to go up. I wonder if we could defer this for a few years, because it seems to me that the CVRD has a lot on its plate. And I think if you want to know how you're doing, all you have to do is look at the gallery. If that gallery's packed, you know you got broken and you should fix it. But if the gallery's like this and everyone seems to be happy, can we not defer that for a couple of years until we get our hospital built, the hospice building built, our water straightened out? We sure don't need another survey right now, I don't think, Mr. Chair. So would you consider that when you look at it?
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Thank you. If you could just put the microphone on, there's a red button at the bottom there. Someone will help you.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect.
It's good I have help. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I want to thank this board, all of you, for all your hard work, especially after viewing the agenda packet with 160 pages. For me scrolling through, I can't imagine that you have to read through this report and come to a conclusion 4 or 5 days later. It's remarkable. On the topic of regional recreation funding, my comments relate to the 27th of April 2018 special board meeting. Number one, all funding scenarios were rejected by the board. I accept the fact that I'm unable to ask a question of you, but I can comment. Why is staff bringing back a rejected funding scenario? Number two, Resolution 18232 was moved and seconded by a framework for a sub-regional services committee structure to be prepared for consideration by the board. Again, not a question, but a comment. Where's the action by the CVRD, staff and board based on this resolution? That was 15 months ago. The board meeting ended with the following recommendation. Send consideration of funding to sub-regional services committees to explore solutions on a sub-regional basis. Committees were supposed to be created after the election. It's been 9 months. I know you've been busy training new directors, but 9 months? Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Further input? For last time, further input? Moving on to the agenda, Ms. Legault.
Thank you. There are no delegations and no items of correspondence. The next business item is IN1, Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes. 1, Electoral Area G, Saltaire Gulf Islands of May 6, 2019, Electoral Area G, Saltaire Gulf Islands, June 3, 2019, and Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, July 29, 2019, for information.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to speak to the Area D Parks minutes for a second.
Absolutely.
And speak to, it is coming up with unfinished business, but it was really important for the community on the one development. There was a motion for the Eagle Shores development that the developer agrees to build a trail and beach access stairway to the CVRD standards. So I just wanted to, it was important that with this land swap or potential land swap, that is something that our community found that is really needed and valuable. Currently, that same piece of property in the past, there was a trail to the beach that did not get finished by the developer. So we really want to make sure that that happens. I just wanted to make note of that.
Thank you very much. Director Smith.
Yes, just with regards to the 6th of May minutes, unfortunately, it looks like there was a bit of a change in the minutes as it progressed, and they didn't move into the next phase for the recommendation from the parks coming out of there. The motion there's stating is that the CVRD install parking signage on Chemainus Road for Stocking Creek Park and to also utilize the Mountain View Road parking lot that's for Centennial Park. That is not what is in the report from the staff, so I'd like that put in there, that we're looking for parking and signage on Chemainus Road to indicate there is also parking at Mountain View Road.
So are you moving that as an amendment to the minutes?
Yes,
Do I have a
amendment.
seconder to that?
It's in the minutes.
Is that appropriate?
It is in the minutes. It's just
Previously.
that the next report is not accurate.
Okay, thank you. So noted, Ms. Legault. Okay, that's for information. Are we prepared to move along? I anticipate this may be a long meeting, so we will be stretching at about the hour-and-a-half mark. Just to let you know, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item of business is IN2, the summary report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding recommendations arising from the Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes for direction.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful if staff presented this material, if they kept it in a ongoing table format that we could track, and included their recommended responses to the advice that's coming out of the commissions, and then the status of those items, so that we can understand what happens to the advice, and report back to the commissions, because right now it's sort of, I feel like it's going into a black hole.
Thank you. Director Stone, Mr. Farquhar, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the reformatting and of the advisory commissions under the bylaw, the reason this is being brought forward in this fashion is because this is information for the committee to consider of recommendations arising from your commissions with respect to parks and trails. Staff are not actioning on items that are being brought forward and summarized in the report, because these are things that we're looking for committee board direction on. They're not things that staff can unilaterally take action on. Typically within the commission minutes, we're finding three areas of information coming back. One is staff are sending referrals to commissions, and we're getting feedback from commissions, which typically staff can act upon. The second is that commissions are commenting on or making recommendations on things that are operational in nature. The installation of parking signage on Chemainus Road is an example of that. These are things that staff are typically taking action on or otherwise are not able to because they are operational matters that are outside our realm or control. The third are things that are clearly looking for committee board direction because they're new items that commissions are identifying or things that they'd like to see happen. And they want to get these things before you as elected officials to give consideration for. So either they're things that the committee board are going to give direction to find ways to bring into the fold of the Parks and Trail Services program, or make decisions that at this point in time be nice to have, but there's just not the capacity for the board to action on, or the resources of the division to action on. But they're things that staff can't just unilaterally take on, because we need your direction as the elected officials in terms of how these things can be resourced out based on what your commissions are asking for.
Thank you very much, Director Stone.
So following up on that, then, when we have something here for direction, without any information on whether it's achievable from a staff perspective based on established budgets, would then the staff be looking for this to be referred to staff to create a report? Is that the kind of motion that's being looked for, or the direction that's being looked for on these minutes, or the resolutions of the commissions? Because it does seem a little bit convoluted, but I understand that you'd need some direction from a committee to say action these items. So at this point, is staff asking whether or not they should develop reports for the board that would authorize either of these expenditures or not?
Mr. Chair, exactly. It would be a bit presumptive for staff to anticipate what the committee and board would be supportive of, and to then endeavor to spend staff time flushing out options or level of effort and the like to determine what it would be to undertake these things without clear upfront direction. So I know it's a bit of a quandary, because as elected officials, these matters are coming to you as well, basically right out from the commissions without any backup or background information. In essence, these are things that commissions are generating as wish lists, that they're hopeful that you as elected officials will want to take on or find the ability to find ways to implement. So a bit of a catch-22, but at the end of the day, certainly if the direction of the committee is for any of these items to see further explored, certainly direction to staff to prepare a report to bring back that we could then inform the resources, the requirements, the capacity to undertake the wishes of your commissions.
Follow up, Director Stone?
So then it would be appropriate at this time to make a motion that the recommendations or requests arising from the Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes be referred to staff to provide a report. Would that be back to this committee?
Mr. Farquhar?
Mr. Chair, I think first and foremost, staff would ask that consideration be given to each on its own, because passing them all as one is adding to staff work. And as you saw at your last meeting, we presented the work program priorities of the Parks and Trails Division through the remainder of the year, and staff are busy endeavoring to complete everything that's been approved in the budget and previously directed by the committee board. So if there are things specific here that the committee feel would be important to undertake, then absolutely, please give that direction. We would bring something back to this committee in terms of the level of effort and everything else. But if there are things here that, may be nice to have, but as a committee, it's not felt that at this point in time it's something to move forward on, recommendations to staff would be, please do not just give direction for the sake of giving direction. We'd want some meaningful support of the committee and board to see some things undertaken if we're going to move in that direction.
Thank you. So I'll turn it over to the directors for those areas if they want to move those forward. But I would say it would be disingenuous, I think, if we task commissions with the capability to make recommendations and then don't review them and provide the relevant information to the board to make a decision. Maybe some of these are within budget, maybe they aren't, but without any information, it's really hard to make any kind of a decision. But I'll leave it to the directors of the individual areas to move those and see if there's the will of the committee to move them forward.
Thank you, Director Stone. My speakers list, I have Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think therein lies the dilemma. We appoint these parks commissions. We ask them to tell us what they need in their specific local areas because they know those local areas best. And then when it comes here, we are not really sure what to do with those recommendations. I'm wondering if there's a better process, and I go back to what Director Nicholson said at the outset. I think it would be more appropriate for staff when the summary report comes forward, such as the one that we're dealing with now, minus .1 from the May 6th meeting in Area G, which we should put on it, that when this report comes back, it comes back with 2 little bullet points from staff saying this will cost this much, and A, it's a capacity issue, or B, it's not a capacity issue, and we can do it, so that we have some guidance, because what we're going to do here today, it looks like, is each one of these things is going to be moved forward at the discretion of the area director, and I'm not going to vote against any area director's recommendation. They know their area best. And we're looking at least another 2, potentially 4-week delay. I mean, some of this is parks construction that we're hoping to get done this summer, and it'll be November before everything's settled out. We've got to find a way to streamline this process and add some credibility to it so that these parks advisory commissions feel heard. I don't like this process.
Thank you, Director Sebring. I have a speakers list. Director Nicholson is next.
Thank you. You know, I really value the commissions, and I struggle with how we as 9 electoral areas can work together to plan to set the most reasonable priorities for limited staff resources. So that's an issue for us. We don't get a lot of stuff that we would love to see done in a year. So it is important for us to see what, the eyes on the ground are reporting to us that these things would be a good thing to do. So I need to understand if in fact they're doable, so whether they're within our jurisdiction, I guess, whether or not they're large cost items or not large cost items and require long-term, some planning into the next year. And then we need, as directors, to have a discussion about priorities. And we need to do that before we do the budgeting and understand what it is that we need to do the next year. And so this is, to me, is just basic information that we need to get. And we maybe not we need to track it. And so it's not something that we would necessarily act on every month or however often we would receive it. But I would expect at least quarterly, we would sit down and take a look at the list. And then also, it's a huge communication tool to report back to commissions on what the plan is about their advice. Because if this is not gonna be a real advisory kind of role, if it's just tokenism, then I'm not on board on that. So I think we can do a better job. I'm not quite sure right now what the solution is, but I think first of all we should be generating better information for us to look at and then move forward.
Thank you. I have Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Farquhar. So my understanding is that these are not regional parks we're talking about. They're parks that are under the jurisdiction of the regional director and their community. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, these are under the jurisdiction of the regional district, so they're under the direction of the board, but they are the electoral area community parks that
And
provide
so
each of the
they're-
9 electoral areas.
So
correct.
these improvements are paid for by that electoral area rather than the whole region?
It depends on what the focus of the ask is, and that's where
Okay.
you will have situations where the staff resources to deliver on the asks will have implications on both the regional parks program and community parks, because staff are delivering on both.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, so I'm looking at this, and under the number 2 electoral area G, they're looking for bark mulch to be explored, and they're saying that there is a report and an Appendix A, but I can't find Appendix A anywhere in the agenda, so I haven't been able to read that report. But I'm thinking, and maybe Mayor Sebring could help me with this, in North Cowichan, when we were getting recommendations, and we don't have commissions in the same way you do, but we do have committees, we kind of keep track, and we see, okay, A, is this feasible? Does the staff feel, yeah, this is actually a great idea, and it would be a benefit? And where and when, given all our other obligations, would it be best to have that consultation? At what budget year? At what state? So in other words, so as chair of the Corporate Service Committee, I'd wonder, well, would we know if these were important things to happen, A? And if they were, are they critical to this next budget year? Or is something else. And so is there some kind of way that that is handled?
Mr. Farquhar?
Mr. Chair, to a degree, yes and no. Specific to the bark mulch interest for trails, the CVRD has a trail standard that was developed several years ago, approved by the board. It applies to all the electoral areas, applies to regional parks. In terms of the Parks and Trail Service delivery, through a standardized approach for parks maintenance and standards, we were able to keep the costs streamlined and be most effective with staff resources. But that's been basically through the direction of the board over the years to have that level of service provided. If there's a desire to move to customizing or one-off amenities or designs or standards that would be applicable to one electoral area or to a portion of the electoral areas, then we're running into an issue where we're no longer standardized and the level of resources and the requirements and everything else are going to go up. And so that would certainly be something that, as staff, we'd be seeking direction of the board, is if there's a desire to move away from the standardized service for parks and trails that's been provided for many years and get into more customizing of the types of standards of trails, of amenities and everything else, then you're basically looking at smaller services. They're going to require more oversight, administration, and management. And is that a direction that the committee and board wants to go? I think that's a strategic planning discussion that the committee or the board has to have in terms of your parks and trail services. But at the end of the day, it comes down to capacity, it comes down to the resources, and ultimately what the board's wishes are.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I'm getting from Mr. Farquhar's verbal, what he said, is that some of these might be outside of what's standard, what we're already doing. And in order to do them, the board really needs to look at that. And to me, that's part of looking at the strategic plan. So I would like to move that we refer this to the strategic plan. Because if we're going to be going down a different direction in this area, I think it's important that we all know what that involves and decide if that's what we want to do. I don't feel like I have enough information right now to know what the implications of this are.
Okay, thank you. So you're moving referral to
I-
strategic plan. Do I have a seconder? I have no seconder, so I'll return to my speakers list. Director Stone.
Yeah, I can't help but think, looking at these, that in the time we have this discussion, that we could maybe find out what the budget impacts are and at least make some decisions. I know when we get recommendations, we don't have a commission, but we have a committee, an advisory committee, and we make referrals to them and they reflect on them and provide information back, but they also make suggestions from time to time. Staff comes back to us with just a very basic, it's not within this year's budget allocation, here's an option. Very simple, very straightforward. The director will sit there and give us a little bit of background and say, based on the commission discussion, or sorry, the committee, they would like to see whatever improvement that isn't actually budgeted this year, but we may have funds left over from this or that, or may decide that this is a bigger priority than that for this year. Or we could refer it to next year's budget, right? If it's not within this year's budget envelope, so to speak. And those are just, below the item, it would say staff, would remark that there's no budget this year for this item. We would recommend referring it to capital projects for next year's budget, or that it's not necessary due to these reasons. And I think that, municipally it might be a bit different. I know our director is at those meetings with the commission, so that provides a better information during the course of the discussion that may help the commission make a more informed recommendation. But I think it would be at least, very simple. It's not in this year's budget. This is what's allocated from the Area G Parks budget this year. We would recommend that it's referred to next year's budget, or that it not be done for the reason that was just mentioned by Mr. Farquhar, and then the committee can make, this committee can make better recommendations in terms of actioning these items. That being said, this whole thing with this specific set of minutes and recommendations for what seemingly are, somewhat simple requests that we could get at least a couple lines from the relevant people of advice towards the committee so that we could actually move it forward. So again, if the affected areas want to move these things forward and make the resolutions to task with some at least high-level analysis of the requests, I'd be happy to support it.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I would like to bring out that the minutes that come before you are specifically requested to be brief and very specific, that the advisory commissions, that has been passed down to them by the staff. So the reason that when you look at the minutes, they're very brief, they don't include background and et cetera, because that is not what they have been advised to include in their minutes. So that's part of it. Tracking is really important. It's very frustrating for these advisory committees to meet once a month to put together their minutes, to spend their volunteer time to work for their community and then find no tracking. It's definitely something, it could be a spreadsheet or something that we could all work with. One of the other things, we've just finished passing and approving the Parks and Trails volunteer policy. There are some things that could be looked at that don't require a budget of a large amount if it fits under the volunteer policy. So I think it's important that we recognize all the volunteers of the parks commissions that meet, that work on these, that they know their communities, but they're looking for tracking. They're frustrated. I don't know which parks commission in the electoral areas is even happy with the direction that everything is going, because they seem to be pulled one direction 1 minute and then the next minute they're in another direction. It is frustrating, and I think that we need to come up with a solution, and it may not be today because we have a heavy agenda, but we do have another community services meeting in 2 weeks, and maybe we should move that to that as one of the topics of discussion.
Thank you very much. Director Sebring.
And again, not to beat this thing to death, but Director Marsh alluded to it, and so did Director Stone. Some of this goes through process, and I don't know what the answer is, but might the answer be, because these Parks Advisory Commissions seem to be making their recommendations in a bit of a vacuum. The difference between what's going on here and what goes on municipally is that we have staff attending those committee meetings, and there's some interaction with staff and that committee/commission. And if the group comes up with something that staff says, you know what, that's absolutely not going to work because A, we don't have the budget, or B, we don't have the capacity, or C, it doesn't meet with our standardized Parks and Trails protocol, or 4, whatever it is, we can sort of get better advice from these commissions coming forward rather than them going, oh, we think this would be a good idea and that would be a good idea, and then we get this kind of shotgun approach that's showing up on our screen here, and we're left to sort it out. I don't know whether the CBRD has the staff capacity to send somebody from the department to these commission meetings, but I think that would forestall a lot of the stuff that we're trying to deal with here today, and that may be a process question for the CAO to figure out later on. I don't know.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
I appreciate Director Sebring's comments, but I would like to also make a referral motion that we refer this to staff to compile a report of the 2019 recommendations to date, and with recommended staff responses, the status of them, and cost implications timing if they were to be implemented, for us to consider at our next meeting. And if we need to add some other process around this, that would be fine. But my understanding is currently staff don't have the capacity to attend commission meetings, so it's really important that we get a better handle on how we're managing this.
So you're moving referral? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'll second on the understanding that the referral includes item 1 from the May 6th Area G meeting, the one that was referenced earlier.
Okay. On the propriety of referral, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the referral, I'd like to say that number one, further on down the meeting, is going to be addressed. So I'm not sure if this needs the number one, electoral area D. I spoke to it earlier with the minutes, and then it will be our unfinished business from the last meeting. So I'm not sure exactly, I mean, that what doesn't matter? Okay.
Mr. Kieber is acting as our substitute teacher today in the absence of Mr. Carruthers. So please be kind to the substitute, ladies and gentlemen.
So I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Chair. I think I heard all 2019 requests. Did I hear that correctly? So it's not just the ones on the agenda, it's all the ones we received to date for 2019, okay? The next community services meeting is in 2 weeks with the agenda going out in a week. So some of the comments from staff on these recommendations, I don't know how many there are, but maybe kind of sparse to be able to make it on the agenda.
So noted. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. Director Duncan was opposed, I believe. Director Nicholson.
I'm not sure that having it in the next 2 weeks, is that necessary if you can do a better job? But the issue for me is getting it well before the budget stuff starts.
Mr. Chair, I heard the next community services, but if you want a more thorough job, absolutely, the meeting after that would be better.
Okay, I believe staff has that direction. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And moving on to reports, item R1 is a verbal report from Maya Munzer, Parks Planning Student, Parks and Trails Division, CVRD Interactive Web Map Demonstration of Explore CVRD Parks and Trails, planned to launch in fall 2019, and that's for information.
Thank you. If you could just put your microphone on, please. Sorry, thank you.
Then I have to stand up here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Grant from the CVRD. Maya and Chris are going to be coming up and joining me at their leisure. Sure. So just to introduce our presentation today. This presentation started a couple years ago when Brian came and asked the question, how much would a Parks and Trails app cost to develop? And so we thought about his question, and we presented Brian and park staff with the opportunity to update our user experience on our website to better match the user experience of our Parks and Trails users. And so this slide is to illustrate the fact that we have a number of people in the Valley who love and appreciate our CVRD Parks and Trails. And the user experience is much greater on the outdoors than it is on the indoors. So what Maya is going to do momentarily is she's going to demonstrate the foundational piece to this revamping of the user experience for our CVRD Parks and Trails, whether they're on a desktop computer, or you can see to the right if they're on their mobile device while they're out enjoying the Parks and Trails. So I would like to give a warm welcome to Maya. She is our Parks summer student. Chris on the end, he works with me in the GIS section. And a little bit of help from me, but not too much. These two have put together this next piece. And I hope you enjoy what you see. And Maya?
Hello. So today I'm basically going to go through a couple different examples of different park users who could possibly access this application and how they might go about navigating the application to access the information they're looking for about Parks and Trails in the Cowichan Valley. So the first example is a user who knows the name of the park they're interested in accessing, but doesn't know much other information about it. The best way to access the park in that sense, given that they know the name, is to search for the park in the search functionality located at the top in the map. So for example's sake, let's say they're interested in accessing Bright Angel Park. The user would search for Bright Angel, and the map will, once loaded, pan to and zoom in, pardon me, on the park that they're interested in. I'll just give it a second here. I swear it does. Yeah, so when searched, the park obviously then, or the map will then pan and zoom to the park in interest. As you can see here, there are a number of amenities available at Bright Angel, and the park user, once they see that, can access more information about the park by clicking on the park, which will engage this pop-up functionality here. The pop-up doesn't offer a lot more information, but it gives the user an idea of the type of park, whether or not there is public access, which I'll go into why that's important in a later example. But most importantly, it gives them the option to access directions to the park. So if the user clicks on this more info hyperlink here, it will direct the user to a separate tab in Google Maps with the to field already populated with the main access point to the park. All the user then has to do is put in their from location and get directions to the park. This can be done on mobile as well as on desktop like we are doing here. And now we have directions to the park. Moving forward, the next example, I'll go back to the default extent here, is a park user who is visiting the region. They're not from the area, they don't know much about the area, and they don't know much about the parks and trails in the valley. One of the ways that they can access information about parks is to simply navigate throughout the map. Given that this is interactive, they're able to simply click and drag and zoom in and zoom out on the application to on an area that they might be interested in. Another thing that they can do is if they know the address of the location they're staying in, they can search the address of where they are. So for example, let's say they're staying at the CVRD at 175 Ingram. You can search 175 Ingram. The map will once again pan and zoom to the location. And from there, the user can then look at parks by panning and zooming in and out on the map that might be in the vicinity of where they are. So if we zoom to the west or pan to the west, we can see the various parks that are available in the western region. Another functionality is if, say, the park user is out in the public, they're out and about, they're not at the location they're staying at. Another feature that is available is the My Location function, which is this little button here. It's not as accurate as putting in the direct or the exact address. However, it gives the user a general area as to where they might be. And then once again, the functionality is the same. They're able to pan around the map, click on parks, and gather more information that way. The third and final example is a user who is just simply wanting to know more in-depth detail about the parks and trails in the Cowichan Valley. So for this purpose, the journal section, which is the panel on the left-hand side here, would be the best place to access more information, more detailed information about the parks they're interested in. So for example, if the user is interested in learning more about Cobble Hill Mountain Regional Recreation Area, if they click on the park or the park title in the map journal, the journal will pan to the section related to the park in question. The map will then reflect the information displayed in the journal. So as I noted before, in the pop-up window, I noted that there was a couple different park categories. The reason why we've identified parks by category is because some parks are obvious or have public access, whereas some don't. And we wanted to make sure we were ensuring that members of the public weren't accessing parks that don't have any features or amenities available to them. So there's two ways that the public can determine whether or not the park is accessible. The first is, once again, clicking on a park and seeing in the pop-up that, for example, this is Coquesila River Park. It's a green space and there's no public access, so there'd be no reason for the public to need to go there. However, if we click on next to Cobble Hill here, Quarry Nature Park, which is a slightly different color than Cobble Hill, you can see that this is a community park, which means that yes, there is public access. There are features or amenities there that the public would be interested in accessing. The last thing I would like to go over is the mobile functionality of this, as Rob touched on at the start. So I'm just going to resize the screen here, and you'll be able to see, as I make the screen smaller and narrow it down, it switches over into the mobile configuration. All of the same functionalities are in place. They're able to click and pan through the map as before. The only difference is it's just organized slightly differently. So all of the maps are still there. If they would like to know more about a specific park, they simply click Learn More, and all of the information and content is available. If they want to get out of this, they simply click anywhere outside of the content, and it brings them back to the map for further scrolling and viewing. That is a brief overview of the functionality of it. Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
I'm sure you're open to some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Director Sebring.
Is trail mapping part of this? I know North Cowichan, we've actually drilled down even further, and when you get into our mountain bike trails on Maple Mountain and places like that, we have an app that it'll tell you where you are so you don't get lost and you find your way home. Is that part of this too or not?
It actually is, and what you'll notice on the screen, there's those little green lines all over the place.
I can't see them from here, but I'm old, so sure. Oh, okay.
So very similar to the North Cowichan app. We have information on we will have more information on the trails available. But the other thing is that with this My Location, the user, if they are in the trails in Bright Angel or Cobble Hill Mountain and they get disoriented, then they can use the GPS functionality on their phone to reorient themselves. And any of the parks that have an information kiosk, there will be an icon available, and that would also allow the user, while they're on the ground, to get reference to, okay, I want to get to that information kiosk to give me a better sense of what the park is all about.
Thank you.
And so the big difference between the Maple Mountain trail map, it's an actual app that's being developed outside of the North Cowichan website. One of the things, the biggest principle that we were pitching to Brian and his group is let's tackle two problems with one solution. And so this is what we're now pitching to Brian and his crew.
I'm just a
Follow-up? Yep.
supplementary, if I might, Mr. Chair. Given that all this work has been done, what's the pitch? I mean, obviously we've spent the money, we've notionally approved doing this because it's been done. What's the next step here? What are you looking for? It says for information on the agenda.
So for today, what we're doing is we're just putting our work, taking the opportunity to showcase the work that our summer student program is, some of the work that our summer student program is working on. We are fortunate that Maya was here last summer with the summer students, with the Park Summer Student Program, and a lot of the data that you see on these maps today is because of our summer student program with Brian and Tanya's here. So the work that Maya was doing last year is a huge component of being able to actually deliver this to you guys today. And hopefully, I see Chris is over there, and I'm hoping that this will meet some of some of the corporate strategic objectives of engaging and communicating with our public. Similar to the North Cowichan app for the mountain biking trails, it's to users, and so we just want to showcase that that we are working diligently in putting forward the betterment of the public.
You'd like to add to that, Mr. Farquhar?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, the pitch was made a while back. As far as we're concerned, they've hit a home run, and this is going to be going live this fall. So this is really just to inform the committee in advance of the final tweaks being done of the good work that's been done by our summer students and our friends in GIS to deliver upon what we had hoped, and they've delivered in a big way. So thank you.
Okay. Speakers list, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good stuff, that. I enjoyed that. It's, I like technology, and that's good use of it. Can you tell me, where did you get all this, the information on for how many parks we've got and where they're located? And I've got a follow-up on that as well afterwards.
So you're asking about like all of the parks and how they're being seen, all the trail data, all the amenity data that's currently available. So those are currently available in our cadastral, and I gathered those that way. I'm not too sure how the better way to answer that would be.
Maya was out in the field last year with GPS and an
Yeah.
iPhone and a camera, and she traveled probably 90% of the trails. She looked at all of these icons that you see on the map. She physically looked at those and noted their location, and yeah, so the work that she's done, it's actually quite nice that she's actually been able to turn that field work into this this map that she's going to be able to share with the community. It's quite nice. I'm glad she's back.
Thank you.
And a follow-up, Director Wilson?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm assuming then that before you went to the parks, you would have had a list, a database of what parks you were going to be going to in the first place. So I perhaps wasn't very clear on that. Where did you get the list of all the parks that you were going to go to?
Well, I was provided with that list at the beginning of the summer from Tanya. It was basically all the parks that had any kind of amenity or feature in them that the public could access or would be of interest to the public. So any park with a trail or anything with some kind of feature, a playground or a sport court, I was told to go to those parks and map all of the amenities and trails within those.
And so just to follow up, just another piece to that is we in GIS have been working with the Parks and Trails Division for forever. And so when the CVRD opens up a new park, acquires a new park, acquires a property for a park, then they feed us that information, and we've been keeping a record of all of those properties, whether they're within the electoral areas or Stony Hill Park is an example that is in North Cowichan. But it's still part of our mandate, and so we capture that one as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, final follow-up, please.
Oh, I guess so.
Thank you very much. So you've got a full list of all the parks, and they're all up to date and current. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yes. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I think this is great. My question is, so how does the user link through easily to the North Cowichan app? Because I'm assuming we don't have North Cowichan parks on here?
We don't have the member municipality parks on this application, and we don't have an easy link to the North Cowichan. So the way that North Cowichan deals with their parks and recreation is they do have right now it's currently available on the iPhone. It's a mobile application that shows mountain biking trails, and right now they've documented Maple Mountain. It's my understanding that they're working on Zuhalem and probably Mount Provo as well. But if you wanted to get into the parks and recreation side of the North Cowichan, then you'd have to go to their website. And then they've got a number of web pages that would illustrate those. And so that is, at this point, we have no overlap with North Cowichan or the member municipalities.
Yes, ma'am.
So what about provincial parks? Are they?
We do identify in our map the provincial and federal, just because they're readily available. And so if we do an identify on the Juan de Fuca Provincial Park, we identify it as being a Crown Provincial Park. And same with the Coquesila. I believe the Coquesila was a provincial park. And where we can provide access or a link to more information, we put that in. And but if it looks like the link is not going to really take the user anywhere, we just basically identify it as a provincial.
Okay, I think it's great, especially if you can link it through to other resources.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, and I've forgotten your two guests' names, Chris and Maya. It's just wonderful when young people, students come and learn on the job and bring us up more into the 21st century. And it's a really, I think, a delightful way to continue to have young people become even a more integral part of our community, because they're helping and making decisions, and maybe sometime we'll be sitting in these chairs either as staff or as elected. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And I'm actually recently able to actually navigate some of these things, which wasn't true when they first came out. So thank you very much. I think you should be very proud, and I'm grateful that you came back too.
So there is an app for that. Director Smith.
Thank you very much, through the chair to staff. I really appreciated the presentation today. I love to be outside, so I also have a daughter and grandchildren that love to be outside, but sometimes my daughter loves to go down trails, and the My spot will definitely save us a lot of grief. I know that one from a few slides down some hills. One of the things that I'd like to ask is, in the app, will it be able to have people that have mobility issues? Will they know if it's accessible for them, if it's somebody with a walker or somebody with walking sticks or a wheelchair? Will they know whether the surface is compatible for them, and also if the washrooms work for someone in a wheelchair that has that extra space required? Will that be in the app?
That information will be available for if we use Bright Angel as an example. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Bright Angel is one of our examples where it is an accessible park, or at least portions of it is. And so as people go in, and as part of the exploration of the parks and trails at home before you get there, if you have mobility issues, then you can find out that information. This park is good for me. This Cobble Hill Mountain may be a little bit iffy on these trails, but these trails, and so the information that that Parks and Trails puts together as part of their brochures and their information will be definitely available to people.
And Director Stone?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because actually I've seen other parks apps that actually show in different colors what trails are accessible, and they have a key that says accessible and have the different levels of accessibility. And then, of course, around mountain biking and stuff, grades of difficulty for bikers. So I guess that would be an iterative step in the future. I think another iterative step would be to collaborate with the member municipalities, because in every part of the region, within the municipalities, there are regional parks and there are community parks that are run by the municipalities. I'm assuming the electoral area community parks are included in this app, but then the municipal community parks would not be. So somebody who's looking to use it will see Cowichan, think this covers the entire region, and then miss out on a whole bunch of different parks opportunities within the municipalities because they're not included. So obviously not saying that that should be funded by the entire group, but we should look to collaborate within the municipalities to have that work done, and maybe next year's summer student can help us build that.
Through the chair, I would like to give a shout out to our member municipalities. Since I started here with the CVRD, our relationships have grown and developed, and we are talking with our member municipalities more and more on these collaborative efforts. Everybody in this room knows that if somebody comes to the Cowichan Valley, they don't necessarily care if they're in electoral area A, B, E, I, or H, or if they're in Ladysmith, North Cowichan. They just want to enjoy the outdoors, and that's one of our goals in continuing to collaborate.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks again. And Transfer Beach is an awesome beach, Director Stone. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item of business is item R2, report from the Manager Communications and Engagement regarding the Community Satisfaction Survey, and the recommendation is for direction.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I didn't know I was going to be following that presentation. Mine is nowhere near as slick. Really, the purpose of me bringing this before the committee is just to provide you with an opportunity to request any additional subject matter that you wish to see incorporated into our 2019 Community Satisfaction Survey. Not to say you wouldn't have the ability to say don't do it, as a member of the gallery suggested, but I would recommend against that. I think there is a lot of value in redoing this, as we have a baseline that's been created in 2016, which we can use to measure our success in a number of areas, and incorporate a few additional questions to gauge satisfaction and support for other things, as things have changed within the communities over the last 3 years since we did this. So this would be an opportunity for anybody to suggest something.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to have this survey at least consider the satisfaction of our community members and residents of our new automated phone answering system that's been in effect here since the end of last year. I'm hearing feedback from community members and residents and even directors that it's not quite meeting the needs of people that are reaching out to contact us. So if there's a possibility to include that, that would be very much appreciated from this director.
Thank you. I have Director Smith. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking down at my paper. I apologize.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's a potential, within North Cowichan's satisfaction survey that they just conducted, they had a question that asked about staff interactions with the municipality, which might be a way that we haven't incorporated into our previous survey, which might be a way to gauge how people are interacting with staff throughout their satisfaction with various means of communication, and thereby drilling down to find out satisfaction with our new phone system, as well as other forms of communication, but we'll certainly look into that.
Thank you. Now, Director Smith.
Thank you, through the chair. I notice in the report there's no financial consideration indicating the cost of a community satisfaction survey. I know that the staff is always telling us that they're already at capacity, and adding something additional to the capacity is of this magnitude is quite extensive. and I don't see the cost associated with it in here. Is it already within some budget, or is it coming forward in another budget?
To Director Smith, this has been budgeted for within general government for the 2019 year. The approximate cost of the survey based on the 2016 one is just shy of about $20,000 to do it in the magnitude that we're doing, and have it be very much repeatable and have that baseline be able to build on the baseline created in 2016. But as kind of proposed and very high level within the report, we're looking at slightly expanding it to reflect some additional considerations that we want to probe the community about. So it may come in slightly over that if we aren't deleting some of the previous questions that we posed.
Absolutely.
So in the 2019 budget, we budgeted 20,000 for this project?
I believe so, yes.
Alternate Director Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The City of Duncan has conducted these surveys in the past. I note in the report here that you want to add more questions. I question adding more questions because...
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. Because you've already set a baseline. You know, we've been able to measure the changes up and down because we stuck with the same questions. I also note that you say in the report that it's going to be 20 to 25% longer. I think nowadays it's probably not a good idea to be making surveys longer. It's probably be a better idea to try and keep them to the level that they're at now rather than trying to keep people engaged longer. It seems, you know, we were running into that problem where people know how long is this going to take and not interested. So a couple of points of concern there.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, you want to respond to that as well?
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry,
If I may.
Sorry, Director Nicholson.
In response to Alternate Director Duncan, it's difficult to say how much longer the survey will take because within certain questions, depending on your response, there may be drill downs to those. So in some cases, it may take longer for a particular respondent to get through the survey because they have more to offer because of their experiences. So in some cases, it may actually be shorter depending on that. So it's just difficult to say. That's kind of a rough estimate in terms then. Also within the report, we're looking at increasing the ability for us to provide people with a link, a secure link to do an online component of the survey rather than having them on the phone. And that's going to be introducing that option earlier on in the phone call. As in the past, we only had 12 online respondents to the secure portal last time. I think there's the ability, if we have that available, to increase the number of respondents through that because there's no real exponential cost increase to do an online one if it's already available, as opposed to increasing the number of phone calls that need to happen. So I think if we are able to bring that up, it'll actually it's much less onerous for somebody to be sitting on their computer or on their tablet, phone, to be answering survey questions if it's something that they think is valuable use of their time, like being engaged civically.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So, this is an interesting conversation because I think it is absolutely critical that we collect information about how well we're doing. And so I think satisfaction survey is one tool to do that, so probably a very important tool. The question is, in my mind, is how are we going to use this information? And I do not see a clear link between spending $20,000 this year and taking that information and using it in our strategic planning, because we're supposed to be doing strategic planning right now. So to my way of thinking, the timing of this kind of a thing should be thought about and probably should be done the spring before the election. So the information is available for the new board as they sit down to do their strategic planning. So we're out of sync right now with this because we did it in 2016, and I don't even know if the new board members were made aware of the results and brought that into their thinking, but I really think that's important because $20,000 is $20,000. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that this is a general satisfaction survey, so that's important on general, how well the CVRD is doing, and sort of high level on some of the topics. But we quite often go out and get much more specific and detailed information on specific areas. So when we think about whether, when we do a satisfaction survey, we should add more questions to it, we should think about whether we will be collecting that information elsewhere. So we did a recreation survey last year, I guess it was. Quite an extensive one, and we really worked hard to collect good information. So from my way of thinking, we probably don't need that kind of level of detail in this particular survey. So we kind of need to go through and think about all the programs and the emerging issues. So from my perspective, I would put this on hold and do a little bit more thinking and get it organized to do well in 21, because we've missed the boat on our strategic planning now, because we're supposed to be doing it right now. So we won't get this information till what, early in the new year, or December maybe if we're lucky. So that would be my recommendation.
I'm just making sure you're not going to reply so I get chastised again. Oh, no, thank you, thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you to Director Nicholson, I suppose this could be the opportunity, if there was a motion made and the committee supported deferring this to a later date, that would be entirely appropriate to happen, as we have not gone down the road too far along the lines here that we could not abort and postpone.
Thank you for that information. I have Director Sebring.
I concur with a lot of what Director Nicholson said. We just went through this at North Cowichan, and I'm hearing from Mr. Schumacher that we're not too far down the road, so I'm assuming the tender hasn't been put out yet, or the RFP, or whatever we call it this week. We haven't figured out which company is going to do this yet. The contract has not been awarded.
We have, but it's, like I said, we're not so far down the road that we're fully committed to going forward with this at this time.
So we've awarded the contract already?
We are going to be working with NRG Research Group, who conducted the survey for us previously, and I believe conducted yours as well.
So this is sole source? We're not putting it out to tender?
No, not for the survey.
We had some issues with our survey, and I have to tell you, as mayor, I was getting phone calls. This survey was supposed to be, and they took great pains to make it statistically valid, which meant that there were X number of people in the 18 to 29 cohort and in the 30 to 45 and whatever. And this little old lady called me very upset because she got a call from a survey company speaking on behalf of North Cowichan, which was another annoyance. These people that made the phone calls were given pronunciation guides and didn't follow them. But anyway, she got the phone call, and the first question, of course, where do you live and how old are you? And as soon as they found out she was 62, they said, well, sorry, we don't need your answers, and they hung up. They didn't, and she was furious because I'm a taxpayer, why the hell won't you take my input? They didn't take the time to explain to her that the 59 to 65 cohort was full, that we'd already received all the responses we needed in that particular subset. And it created and she wasn't the only one. I know our CAO got calls, our communications people got calls. So I'm saying whoever does this survey, let's be clear that they are representing, in this case, this regional district, and that they do a good job of representing us, and that they take the time to explain some of this stuff, and that they read the pronunciation guides we provide them, so that they're not calling on behalf of the Cowichan Regional District. It was embarrassing. Frankly, it was embarrassing, some of the stuff that I heard in the course of this survey being done. Thank you.
Okay. I have Director Marsh.
Well, it might be hard for me to get cheerful after that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Schumacher, I'm wondering, did I knock everything over? Didn't even
Yes, you
notice.
did.
Well, you just can't take me anywhere.
It's okay, it's on
Even when I'm
camera.
sitting down.
It's on film.
That's okay. It's not my worst moment. Mr. Schumacher, some of the expansion of the survey questions, you're going into asset management and healthcare. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're hoping to seek? How are you bringing those questions, in what regard?
Through the chair to Dr. Marsh, we're focusing on asset management and level of service. It's something that we probed very high level last time around, but as we have a new asset management plan and strategy being rolled out, we saw this as a prime opportunity to gauge people's overall awareness and satisfaction or priority for how they would like to see our assets managed, and whether levels of service would be comfortable with reductions to levels of service or maintenance of levels of service with increasing costs. And then obviously going forward, as we're rolling that out, there'll be additional opportunities, but it would be great to get a sense of what the general feedback was around that subject. The healthcare questions, although kind of outside of our scope as a regional district, through our partnership with our Cowichan Community Health Network, we recently sat down with them. They're going to be redoing their community portfolio profile. Forgive me, I can't remember what the name of it is, the extensive work that they did they provide to Island Health again, and so they were hoping that they could include some very high-level questions about satisfaction with healthcare services at the tail end of our survey in order to have some statistically valid information that represented the region as they go forward into that process. Their survey is much larger than ours and is done both online and in paper format. And they're going to be launching that, I believe, later this fall as well. So the timing would work well for them to have some additional information prior to going into that exercise.
Okay, and also I'm thinking of the things we heard in 2016 that people were concerned about and wanted addressed better, and one was transit. And I've seen recently a meme or a meme, I don't know what you call it, which illustrates someone wrote, to get to Nanaimo from Cowichan, and then they had you go down and to Victoria, across the ferry, and in Vancouver, and around and back to the ferry, and then there's and Jim Wakeham's nodding his head. So I'm hoping that this would help us get some more numbers on the urgency of trying to address that. Certainly I could give you some anecdotal stuff about my household this summer and people going in different directions for planes and ferries. And I noted that well over 80% were concerned about climate concerns in 2019 or 16, and now we're 3 years, almost 4 years later. So I don't tend to agree with most of what my colleagues have said around waiting till after the strategic plan. I feel like we're building on questions we asked before, and it's almost okay if we're getting that a little while we're looking at the plan concurrently and seeing if we're on track and what areas we might want to look more closely at, what new ideas we might be able to get. And I think it's important to continue to engage the people in adaptation around climate change, which was one of the concerns in the last report, and asset management is certainly a big part of that. So I'd say go ahead, and if the board wanted to postpone, I wouldn't recommend postponing till 2021. I would say maybe postpone until later in the fall if we really need to, but it seems to me it would be kind of interesting to see if what the strategic plan that the board sort of comes up with kind of fits with the concerns of the community. And it would give us an opportunity then to decide, do we need to adjust our plans a bit, or do we need to educate the community in ways in which our strategic plan is actually a goal to get to what they are concerned about. So I'm happy to go ahead with it now, or potentially in a few months, but certainly not postponing it till 2021.
Thank you. Director Stone.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going well. How are you?
Good, good.
Ask the other directors how they're doing.
We don't have time for that.
Okay.
So just a couple of comments based on what we've already heard. Repeatable core questions are critical for trending and analysis, right? So as a data deconstruction freak, We need that stuff. And the methodology also of the questioning needs to be consistent to, again, provide the statistical validity in the trending over time. I fully accept and appreciate the specific issues around the way the survey was conducted. That's definitely something that obviously would need to be shared with the consultant and the survey team, that wouldn't be acceptable, and that would, but there's a real challenge in sort of putting it out to tender every time and ensuring that you have methodology that is consistent, as well as the repeatable core questions that are required from a data analytics standpoint for trending and analysis. So I'd be very cautious about sort of wavering on that statistical importance, or else you don't have the relevance that you need to do proper trending and analysis over time. So that has to be sort of uncorruptible, as Director Duncan had said, that you need those core things to be consistent. Now, if you have timely information that you need to gather relevant to key issues in the communities at any given time, then it's okay to have an offshoot, some bonus questions, if you will, each survey that differentiate from that core, but the core must remain consistent. And frankly, from a data standpoint, exactly the same wording, exactly the same methodology and delivery. So I understand the sole sourcing, and because of the dollar amount, sole sourcing would be okay under the procurement rules. So all of those things being addressed, that's where I would come out. The other thing is that reflecting on the delay, we're 3 years from the previous survey, actually over 3 years, I believe now. I think it was summer 2016, or was it fall 2016 that it was fall? So we're coming up on 3 years. I would agree that going forward, the best time to do it would be so that all the information is ready for a new board. However, waiting from 2016 to spring of 2022, for example, is a 6-year gap. That's too long, again, to maintain some statistical trend analysis that would be considered valid. So I would actually recommend that we do go forward with it this year and then schedule the next follow-up for spring 2022, which is another 3 years, 2.5 years from now. But it'll get us on a path, then get onto a 4-year cycle of the spring before the election, data available for the new board for strategic planning. So I would support this going forward as it is recommended here by staff, because then you do get the value of the trending analysis and the statistic validity over time. But I would be strong, based on the feedback of Director Sebring, that the organization needs to know for $20,000 to get this kind of a survey is a good value, for sure, from a cost standpoint, but that doesn't mean they can fall down on the delivery, pronunciation, for example, or taking the time, because I know what it is. There's people in a call center, they've got their script, they get somebody who's not, they're being driven by a whip somewhere saying you got to have so many calls and surveys completed each hour. So that's why they're like, oh, we don't need your information, thanks, click. But there has to be an understanding based on staff's feedback that that wouldn't be acceptable way to treat the situation. But again, I would always give that feedback to staff and have trust in staff that they would work with the consultant to ensure that that we do that, and understand that as much as we want to keep that consistent methodology, if they can't perform at a standard that we find acceptable, that they wouldn't get the next contract, that it would be put out there for tender, with the understanding that the methodology and the core questions would have to be followed from the previous surveys, even if it was a different company delivering it.
I see the mic go on, so Mr. Schumacher.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Stone, I may miss a few points here because there was a lot that you covered. It's my understanding that in the previous survey that was delivered, we didn't receive any complaints in terms of the delivery of it from residents, and that it was a very good working relationship. It was conducted with a lot of integrity, and we were very satisfied with it. I wasn't here at the time, obviously. But I have full intentions of sitting down with my counterpart in North Cowichan to discuss how that went, and make sure that any of the issues that were experienced, as Director Sebring mentioned, are discussed with the consultant prior to the launch of it. Completely agree with the statistical validity in terms of keeping the wording identical. It's key to the integrity of the survey, and those questions that had previously been posed would not be modified in order to disrupt that. It would be new questions that would be added in addition to it, as opposed to modifying them.
Thank you. I have Director Wilson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I'm not a cynical or suspicious person, but I have a lot of suspicion and a lot of cynicism as far as surveys are concerned. I've seen far too many that are so far off the mark that they don't mean anything at all, and I have the same feelings about this. I tend to agree with what Director Morrison said just now. The phone answering service or directory is probably one of the worst I've ever come across, and that applies equally to the website navigation. But what I'd like to know here is what has actually been done to address the concerns that were brought up in the last survey? Are they just read, oh yeah, okay, we're not doing very well here? Has anything actually been done to address those concerns? That's it. Thank you.
I don't know if I would be the best person to answer that question. If our CAO was here, he might be able to give a good 30,000-foot answer to actions taken since the last go around. But I think as the first or second time that the survey was conducted for the CVRD, I think it revealed overall general satisfaction with service delivery. But it definitely identified some key focus areas that I believe staff took into consideration and really worked towards improving where those metrics were down overall compared to others.
Thank you. A follow-up?
So the only person that can answer whether anything's actually been done with the results of that survey is the CAO. Nobody else knows. This is a communication problem here we're talking about. If we're going to have a survey and get some results, at least let's find out what's actually been done to address those, and that shouldn't be confined to one person.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I have an extensive speakers list. Reply to that, Mr. Schumacher.
Through the chair, Director Wilson, with this survey going forward in 2019, the data that we're going to gather, in speaking with the consultant, we're going to get back much more detailed output on the information so that we can use it more strategically over the next 2.5 to 3 years until we do our next survey, in a way that I don't necessarily may not have been done before, where we can review the data in spreadsheets and segregate particular concerns within particular electoral areas or sub-regions of the district to better inform how we go about engaging with citizens or key focus areas within those areas. So I fully intend to use this data that we get out of this survey to its full capacity and get the most value that we can out of it. And I'd be happy to sit down with you later to discuss how we could go about doing that.
You're very welcome. I'm going to use my pronunciation guide and call on Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you too, Mr. Schumacher. Yeah, I totally agreed with Director Nicholson in that this would make sense with our strategic planning. And then hearing Director Stone saying the time gap did make sense, so that we did need to come together with a shorter time frame and then again before a new board, I think is really important. And my number one pet peeve currently has been already recorded is the telephone system that is currently here. So hopefully we get that on there because it is not very good at all. I get all kinds of complaints, and it was perfectly fine before, so I don't know what went on there, but I do believe that we do need to keep the statistics and not too many years apart, so I will be voting on that.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that North Cowichan and Duncan have recently done such surveys close to this. And one of the things that I find is most residents in the CVRD aren't really accurate on where exactly they live. They know they live in the Cowichan Valley, but do they live in Ladysmith, or do they live in Saltaire? Do they live in Chemainus, or do they live in Saltaire? So their addresses state one thing, they're confused. So now we're going to send them another survey for North Cowichan and for Duncan residents, asking them regional CVRD questions. and they're going to be confused. So is this too close to the North Cowichan and to the Duncan data that's already been collected? And as a new director, I have not seen the report. It's not for the 2016 the report is on here, but I don't, like Director Wilson indicated, we don't know what the key focus points were that came out of that, and what has been addressed and what hasn't been addressed and how it's been addressed, so that we can also know what has gone on between 2016 and 2019, so that we can know whether the actions are something that we could be addressing even in our strategic plan. So those could be helpful for us when we do go into the strategic plan, to have those key focus areas so that we can maybe address them within that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just making sure I didn't miss Director Nicholson. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did.
I missed you, so go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what Director Stone mentioned. As long as we get onto a cycle where this information is available at the beginning of a term, that would be a good thing. I also think that these kind of surveys need to be designed, if you're asking about satisfaction, for continuous improvement. The goal is not to get a survey that says, oh yeah, you're doing a good job. The goal is to learn where you could do better. So I haven't had an opportunity or a chance to go through and think about the questions that are currently being asked and what additional things. I mean, that's quite a big, that takes quite a lot of analysis. I didn't have time to do that before the meeting today. But I'm just wondering if maybe if any of us have the opportunity to do that and think about it, they could give you some input before this actually happens in September, or whenever it's going to do, because I do think it's really important. It needs to remain valid, but it needs to provide us with information we can use. And we need to have a further discussion about how we're going to take this information and move it forward, because it absolutely, it's no point doing it unless we use it.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yes, I certainly don't know all of the ways that Mr. Crothers and his staff have implemented some of the feedback from the survey, but certainly I can talk about a couple. People were concerned about affordable housing. Based on that, we asked the question as a referendum question at the election, and it passed, so that we would do some funding for housing. People were concerned about water. Same thing, we had a referendum question. They were concerned about transit. We haven't had a transit meeting for a while, but we have addressed some of the transit concerns, and we have some difficulty with our neighbor in Nanaimo to get that going. I expect it will at one point go, but so I think you know, perhaps because there's a lot of newer people in staff, no one felt comfortable. But I think if you had taken the time to read the report, and since we've been here for 9 months, you'd realize that quite a bit has already been addressed and is being addressed and is the process of being addressed. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, further to what Director Marsh had just stated, and just reviewing this, I see a number of items that were raised as concerns and items in this last survey have been incorporated and addressed in some of the work that not only we as a board have done and previous corporate strategic plans, but work that staff are doing as well. So I'm quite comfortable with that. I think that it boils down to a really simple thing for me. Yes, let's get the timing so that it can be effectively used by new boards and the likes, but somebody raised this with me early on in my time here, and that was the question, when is it a good time to consult with the public that we serve? And there's only one answer, and it's now. So I wouldn't put it off and for sake of timing. Let's consult, let's keep all of those things that have been mentioned around the table, the consistency, the effectiveness, the value of the data, and move forward. Thank you.
Director Stone.
I'll just keep it brief. I just want to say that the information that comes from these surveys informs the board. The board directs the direction of the regional district, so it's on our responsibility. So it's not looking over our shoulders to staff to say, what have you done with these results? It's to look around the table and say, as a board, what have you actioned for staff to improve results where there are deficiencies? So the relative success varies based on different issues, but it's clear that action has been taken on most of the deficiencies that were in that report, whether it's questions about land use services or affordable housing and water concerns. The concerns were prioritized by the previous board to act on. Now, again, we can all say whether we're happy with the actions that were taken based on that feedback, but I think it's pretty clear by reading the report that action has been taken, and any actions that weren't taken are the responsibility of the board members. So it's up to us. So with the new survey, that can help inform us, and we can move forward from there. Stop bringing up transit. You know how sore I am about that. But I would say, I just want to make a quick comment because I know it's on the public record. The RDN board has been really supportive. I think it's actually with our transit partners. Mr. Wakeham's here somewhere hiding in the back. It's working with transit and the province around transit hour allocation and working through some of the regional connection issues. We have had a lot of fun with it online with Twitter and memes and so on. But I will say that I think we're making progress. Hopefully we don't need more studies after this year to prove the case for a third or fourth time, but I'm confident that we will get action on that front this term.
Alternate Director Manhas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The biggest complaint I got when we ran the North Calgary survey was it was too long. So I'm not in favor of any more questions besides maybe the phone, as many directors here are mentioning that. And I do agree with the same questions for analytical purposes. I think we need that statistical data. That's all I have to say.
Congratulations, I have exhausted my list. Your pleasure on this? Well, it is for direction. Director Morrison.
Move that staff proceed with the survey.
It's moved by Director Morrison. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Discussion. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with the report, and I'm okay with the extra questions. I think that there's always going to be a few people that are going to complain about something, to wit, us few around here. We're always complaining about something, but we're looking to get answers. Island Health is building a new hospital hopefully in the next 4 or 5 years. They really want this information. That's why they're funding our Cowichan. They don't want to have the old model hospital where there's nothing going on in the community until you're just about dead and then you're in the hospital. They're trying to get the answers now, so it doesn't seem appropriate, to truncate that down. And given, I would say, the very real health challenges citizens in all over the world, but North America we're looking at now are facing with stress and anxiety and depression and aging problems, I think people will be really kind of refreshed to get to talk about their health or the concerns of their health about their loved ones or their neighbors. And so I think that perhaps with maybe a tweak of how the person comes across, if they're coming across abruptly, maybe it's not going to be as friendly. But I am happy with the staff report as it is, and that's what I'm seconding.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I keep going back to this, what are we going to use the information for, and the timing. And Director Stone's point about do it now and then do another one before the end of this term in preparation for the new board, I get it. But really, that's the difference between spending $40,000 or spending $20,000. And given that, this survey, if it proceeds, will happen, I'm assuming sometime this fall, and we'll get the results early next year, by which time our strat plan should be pretty much done. I can't believe it isn't already, frankly. I'd sooner spend $20,000 than $40,000 in this term, so I'm going to vote against this, because I'd really prefer to go where Director Nicholson went earlier and say, let's put it off till 2021. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Director Marsh.
I think that, and I can't by any means figure it out, but I think that the cost of an extra survey give over all of our general government, you're probably looking at 0.00001 something. And I really heard a lot of the people who understand the importance of doing surveys every 3 years so the information is relevant. You know, I mean, I would put out that if I could, the argument that if we don't do one now and one in 3 years, then that's taken us 6 years, and that makes it even less relevant. So if we're worried about spending the 0.00, whatever it is, well, let's just not survey at all. It costs money to engage with your community. It's never been more important to engage with your community. The issues have never been more central to actually everything that we need to have: water, adaptability to climate, health. I mean, let's just go ahead and bite the bullet and come into the 21st century and continue on communicating with our citizens in a statistical way, not just on the street corner, not just anecdotally because somebody's friend said, that survey was so long. To me, that's just like, so I'd say let's get it done now. And I guess we could always revisit it if we want to do one in 3 years, but let's make this one statistically more relevant because it's not so far away from the last one.
Director Kuhn.
I will offer a somewhat different opinion. From what I observed, the surveys that we undertake don't really initiate us to change something or introduce new policies or whatever. The policies that were undertaken before the survey went out. Talk about water, affordable housing. That wasn't done because of the survey. That was done before that. So as far as I'm concerned, these surveys, and I'm being kind of sarcastic here, these surveys are nothing but feel-good instruments for the CVRD. We get confirmation of the decisions we've already made at the board, and it makes us feel good. That's basically what it is, because if you look back at our decisions, the decisions that the board has made in the past, they were not made because the survey initiated that. No, we already had that in our minds. And look at the water project that was put through. It wasn't put through because of a survey. It was a decision we made, and we undertook all kinds of sessions in the public, educated the public, convinced the public. That's how it went. It wasn't a survey. So to get back to the survey, as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't have them that often, and I certainly wouldn't waste an awful lot of money on them.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Keep your hands up, please. Director Smith, Director Kuhn, Director Sebring, Director Salmon, Director Yanni DiNardo, Director Wilson. It passes. Now, I thought this was going to be the short portion of the program, and I promised that we would take a short break. So I'm going to do a quick survey. Shall we take a short break? I have consensus. I want you back here in 10 minutes, or we're starting without you. We have a full agenda. Welcome back. With your indulgence, fellow directors, there are a number of items, 3 items that have to go to the board for budgetary concerns. And if we can deal with R4, R5, and unfinished business number 2 prior to the regional recreation piece, if that would be okay with my fellow directors. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Unanimous, it has to be. Thank you. Ms. Legault, R4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R4 is a report from the General Manager, Community Services regarding budget amendment approval for Function 101, and the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the 2019 budget for Function 101 Community Health Network be amended to 1, increase grants general revenue by $66,938, and 2, to increase grants to organizations by $66,938.
It's moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Nicholson. Discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. R5?
This is a report from the Manager, Couch and Lake Recreation Division regarding budget amendment approval for Function 405, and the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the 2019 budget for Function 405, Couch and Lake Recreation, be amended to 1, increase transfer from capital reserve by $26,500, 2, decrease minor capital expense by $35,000, and 3, increase capital furniture, fixtures, and equipment by $61,500.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Kuhn. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. And unfinished business 2 item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding Parkland Exchange alternative approval process for electoral area D, Cowichan Bay. And for the committee's information, there's a slight revision proposed to the wording that is appears before you on the agenda. That it be recommended to the board, 1, that a land exchange agreement with the owners of Eagle Shores Lane subdivision to subdivide a portion of their land, Lot 1, Remainder 1, Section 4, Range 7, Cowichan Land District, VIP 85643, to exchange it with CVRD Park Lot 6, Section 4, Range 7, Cowichan Land District, EPP 50188, including a provision for an amenity contribution towards establishment of a public beach access that is mutually agreeable to the CVRD and the developer be approved. 2, that a bylaw be prepared authorizing the exchange of parkland described as CVRD Park Lot 6, Section 4, Range 7, Cowichan Land District, EPP 50188 for a portion of Lot Remainder 1, Section 4, Range 7, Cowichan Land District, VIP 85643 for park purposes, and 3, that public approval for the adoption of the exchange of parkland for a portion of Lot 1, Remainder 1, Section 4, Range 7, Cowichan Land District, VIP 85643, for the bylaw be approved or be obtained through an alternative approval process.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Stone. Discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you for your indulgence with that. I apologize to our recording secretary for jumping all over the place. And now the reason we're all here. Let's get ready for R3. Are you ready, Mr. Elzinga? Excellent, so am I. Go, sorry, R3.
Thank you. Item R3 is the report from the General Manager, Community Services regarding regional recreation, Phase 3 facility funding, and recommendation before you is for direction.
Hello, Mr. Chair, and to directors of the board. Very simple topic called regional recreation. I've got a PowerPoint for you to try and explain probably 50 years in about 10 minutes, so I will try my best. There might be some gaps in the information, and I'm available for questions afterwards. I'm going to start with the fair, equitable funding for Cowichan's publicly funded recreation facilities has been an issue since Fuller Lake Arena was constructed in the late 1960s. Since the 1960s, 7 other major recreation facilities have been constructed. Some facilities have a better direct correlation between taxpayers and users than others. Of the major facilities, the most recently constructed was the Cowichan Aquatic Center, which opened in 2008. North Cowichan and Duncan, prior to construction of the Cowichan Aquatic Center, sought other jurisdictions to contribute tax dollars to that facility. North Cowichan and Duncan said at the time that for areas where there was no tax support, residents would be subject to a higher admission fee. At that time, Cowichan Tribes was the only jurisdiction to contribute funding. North Cowichan and Duncan exempted areas G, H, and Ladysmith from the higher admission fees because of their existing contributions to the Frank Jameson Community Center in Ladysmith. Residents of all other electoral areas and the town of Lake Cowichan were subject to two-tiered fees to use the Cowichan Aquatic Center. Residents in those two-tiered areas who were unhappy with that situation were directed to contact their elected officials. Over the next few years, each jurisdiction, either individually or as part of a group, negotiated with North Cowichan and Duncan on a contribution to the Cowichan Aquatic Center to remove the two-tiered fees. Some areas' contribution was publicly approved, some were directed through another CVRD function. Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam-Glenora, negotiated with North Cowichan and Duncan to have an initial contribution and public consent process to eliminate the two-tiered fee and to have a referendum during the 2014 election to seek public consent to raise the contribution to appropriate levels. For reasons unknown to me, the referendum in Electoral Area E did not occur in 2014. A new Electoral Area Director was elected. North Cowichan and Duncan advised that new director that a public approval process was necessary to raise the contribution and avoid the reimposition of two-tiered fees. An alternate approval process was conducted in Electoral Area E in 2015 to raise the contribution to the Cowichan Aquatic Center. The AAP failed, and the results were reported to the CVRD board in the fall of 2015. The CVRD board directed that a review of funding for recreation across the region be conducted, and North Cowichan and Duncan chose not to reimpose two-tiered fees until that review had been concluded. Since October 2015, 4 years ago, the CVRD has undertaken a regional recreation planning initiative. The terms of reference were determined and a total budget of $155,000 for the project was approved. There is the terms of reference as an attachment to this staff report. A Regional Recreation Select Committee was established to steer the project. Staff recommended that have representation from each of the 5 recreation commissions and 2 members of the board. The board at the time chose to have 5 members of the board on a 10-member committee, and 1 member of the committee resigned, so we ended up with 9 members. We ran with 1 workshop with that committee to discuss how to move forward. The committee broke the work into 4 phases. We put out an RFP for phases 1 and 2. Phase 1 was a large public engagement exercise to get input on the wants and needs of the community for recreation services now and into the future. And the second phase was a facility use study. For the 9 regionally significant facilities we now have information on, residents of which areas are using which facilities. The last study done like this was in 2011. We're now focusing on phase 3, which is identifying potential regional funding models. And again, within the terms of reference, the recreation facilities we're talking about are listed there on the slide. Before I started my presentation, I passed out a package to make it easy for everybody. So there's the 7 pages which outline the current state of funding, the status quo, 5 alternate models, and option F, which is the recommended model. I'm going to say right now that the consultant had a typo in the package, so the recommended option from our consultant who did this report is that the combination for option F is hierarchy and usage, not proximity and usage. So it should be hierarchy and usage, but the numbers are all correct. And by the way, the numbers are obviously 2017 numbers. That's when the study was done. So the 5 alternate funding models that the consultant worked with the committee on were usage, population, equal assessment, a sub-regional or proximity-based model, and a hierarchical model. A usage-based model was based on that facility use study and who was using each facility from each jurisdiction. Population's fairly explanatory from each jurisdiction. The equal assessment model is based on the theory that the $300,000 house in Ladysmith, the $300,000 house in Mill Bay, the $300,000 house in Yubo would all pay the same toward the 9 recreation facilities. The sub-regional or proximity-based model speaks to the recreation facilities in that sub-region are paid by the people in that sub-region. So Cowichan Lake Recreation would be funded by areas F, I, and the town of Lake Cowichan. Frank Jameson would be funded by areas G, H, and Ladysmith, and so on. The hierarchical model was based on paying for the nearest facility even if it wasn't in your area. So now Cowichan Lake Recreation, areas F, I, and the town of Lake Cowichan would not only be paying for Cowichan Lake Recreation, they would be paying for the Cowichan Aquatic Center. In all 5 alternate funding models, in all of them, funding increased for electoral area A, Mill Bay Malahat, C, Cobble Hill, area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam Glenora, area G, Saltaire Gulf Islands, area H, North Oyster Diamond, in all 5. And in all 5, the funding decreased for North Cowichan. All other areas went up or down depending on the model chosen. The committee could not come to consensus, and with no committee recommendation to the board, the consultant made a recommendation, with some input from staff, on the hierarchical funding model. This funding model, again, would mean that a jurisdiction would contribute toward the nearest facility for which its usage was more than 2%. This practical application of the formula seemed to make the most sense. So on the screen is that recommended option F. Again, it says hierarchy in this version. In some of the versions within the report, it says proximity, but the numbers are the same. The CVRD board had a full-day meeting planned for April 27, 2018. With no real movement by lunchtime, the meeting ended with the following recommendations. Send consideration of funding to sub-regional services committees to explore solutions on a sub-regional basis, with the understanding these committees would probably be created in 2019 after local government elections, and to disband the Regional Recreation Select Committee. And to date, there has been no creation of sub-regional services committees. At a subsequent meeting, staff informed the board that Phase 4, the Regional Recreation Strategic Plan, could be completed without the Regional Recreation Select Committee. After more public consultation, the final Regional Recreation Strategic Plan was presented to the Community Services Committee on June 26, 2019, and approved by this board on July the 10th. With the strategic plan approved, staff were responsible for bringing up funding one more time. There were some areas that were of considerable consideration through the committee's deliberations, so I'm just bringing that to the board's attention, or to the committee's attention. Some are more difficult than others. Perhaps the less difficult ones are basically based on funding, with Area G potentially contributing to Fuller Lake Arena, Area G and H increasing the funding to Frank Jameson Community Center, and areas A and C contributing to the funding of the Shawnigan Lake Community Center, with a potential merger of recreation commissions. Difficult discussions, but really based on financial implications. The even more difficult discussion is around aquatics. The financial implications have the ramification if increased funding is requested from areas in the South End, it may renew calls for a South End Aquatic Center. To date, There's been really no incentive for the CVRD board to consider alternate funding models for recreation. Two-tiered fees provided an incentive in the past for contribution to the Couch and Aquatic Center. Two-tiered fees are an administrative nightmare for facility staff, and I'm unclear on the appetite to install two-tiered fees again. There's also other implications in the existing agreements between some areas and the Couch and Aquatic Center, like areas F and I. They speak to contributions reflecting updated usage statistics, which we now have. So staff would require some direction on whether we implement those usage statistics now for the 2020 budget. A lot to consider. Staff is looking for direction on where we go from here. Mr. Chair, I'm available for questions.
I'm sure there might be one or two. I'm just going to write some names down as the hands come up. I have Director Sebring, Kuhn, Smith, and Wilson. Are there any others? So let's start with those. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. First of all, I think I've identified another typo in the report. In every other option, North Cowichan's total contributions at the very bottom, total of all regional facilities, is 5.983. And on the option that's being recommended here, option F, it's for some reason 5.810. And I don't know why that is. I think that's a typo. The observation I would make goes to one of the very first things that Mr. Elzinga said, and that is, in my mind, the need for a correlation between taxpayers and facility users. I have long favored a model, and I'm not sure it's going to fly at this table. I'm just putting it out there. I have long favored a usage-based model. We weren't the first area to do two-tier fees. They did it at the new pool in Nanaimo when that was first built, and they solved that by doing precisely what we did with all our facilities, where they, for I think a 60-day period, took everybody's postal code who walked in the door, and they got agreement at their regional district that they were going to base the contributions to that pool on that usage and refresh those stats every 2 years and proceed on that basis. And they got rid of two-tier that way. To me, that's the one that makes the most sense. But I'm willing to compromise and look at option F or other options that may be before us here, because the bottom line, and Mr. Elzinga identified it, the current model has North Cowichan paying too much, full stop. Every other one of these options has our share coming down, as it should. And that doesn't mean that, we would actually be increasing our contribution to Lake Cowichan under some of these. We might even be paying into Kerry Park under some of these. But our total outlay, and that's why I identified that 5.983 versus 5.180, our total outlay would come down either that much or that much, depending on which model we go to. So I'm quite happy to look at any of them, but I really would appreciate if we could work on the principle that was identified at the very outset, which is the correlation between taxpayers and users, because I think that's the fundamental piece that we need to consider here in the interest of fairness, and it's a piece that we can defend to our electors, to say, look, sorry, but Director Yandinardo is nodding. The folks in Cow Bay may have to pay a little more for the pool, but you can say to them, but we're using it, right? Would you prefer to go back to two-tier? That's not a threat. I, like you, don't have a sense of what my council or Duncan's council, with all due respect, or even Cowichan Tribes would have to say about a return to two-tier. Equally, I don't think we can continue without some kind of resolution. We can't continue the way we are. I don't think we'd be prepared to do that. We'd have to come up with something better. So whatever that looks like. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Director Kuhn.
I concur with Director Sebring. I'm fairly simple-minded. I like straightforward, simple solutions. Often they're not possible because I recognize life is complicated at times and you can't find a simple solution. This here is an invitation to a simple solution. And the simple solution is simply, if you use a facility, you pay for its operation. If you don't want to pay for its operation, well, then you shouldn't use it. It's so simple. It makes my head spin when you think about it. It's the opposition that we had in the past, and I remember this is the third time that I've participated in this whole thing, and I think Director Morris and Director Yanni Dinarda will remember we've been through the ringer with this whole affair. One of the big stumbling blocks by the outlying areas, and that is primarily the west and the north end, was that we would lose autonomy. And that, to me, is a big issue. I don't want to lose autonomy, and I'm sure none of the other areas want to lose autonomy either. But if you look at the system of usage, if you pay for use, you don't lose autonomy, because the money that is required for the operation gets distributed according to the use. And if for instance, any capital expenditures were required by any one region, and they felt like, well, we're going to build ourselves a castle here, fine, go ahead and build it. If you find the people to attend, that's your problem. And if my people don't want to attend that, that's your problem too, because then we will not contribute. So it's a very simple, straightforward system. And as Director Sebring already indicated, it's totally defensible. It's defensible to anybody. Like, yes, there's going to be people or areas that will pay more in the future if we go that route, and there'll be others that will benefit because they'll pay less. The ones that pay more, I mean, how could they refuse to pay more when at the same time they know they're using the other facilities? It is kind of hard to defend. I mean, if I was director for Area I and we used very extensively the aquatic center, I couldn't possibly stand up to my people and say, well, you know what, but we don't really want to pay for that. I mean, it makes no financial sense, and it's even morally very detestable. So to me, this whole issue, pay by use, is the most logical, the most simple, the most defensible plan there is. And I'm very much in favor of it. And I would go so far to say, if we choose any of the other options, eventually down the road we will get back to the same problem, because there'll be dissatisfied people, there'll be people that feel they've been disadvantaged. You cannot get disadvantaged if it's pay by use. You just can't get disadvantaged, because you either use the facility or you don't. If you don't use it, well, you don't pay. So it's very simple. So I'm very much in favor of that plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. Director Smith is next.
Thank you very much. I am new to the table, but as you can see, I've been faithfully following this for many, many years, and I have compiled quite a bit of documentation involving it. So I feel that I'm up to speed on it. While I was trying to work back and forth between some of the documents, I did find that I wanted to have a good look at the usage percentage and the option F percentage. And so I have created a spreadsheet that gives a little more definition to those two items. I'd like to pass it out to my colleagues at the table. And I think that it's important that we look at the two versus usage and the payment according to the option F that was presented in front of us today. And then it's much easier, it's a bit color-coded. I also agree that usage is really important, and over time, usage will change depending on the demographics and the different people. We in Area G, and I can probably speak for Mary also from Area H, that we are very fortunate to have Frank Jameson in our area within a very close proximity. And I know that we appreciate the facility. The programs that are run there are extensive. The staff there are constantly updating the programs to reflect what the communities are looking for. They're on top of what's going on within the 3 communities there. But I think it's important that, you know, Ladysmith is growing by leaps and bounds, and their usage will obviously change and increase. I've been told at the last meeting for population housing that my area is going to go back in population. I don't agree with them, but we are not going to be doing leaps and bounds. So I don't think that our percentage of usage is going to change by much. It may change a little bit. Ladysmith may change more, but I think it's important that usage be looked at. But I just want to take a moment to pass this out. Can I just pass it?
That would have been nice to have it at the beginning.
Well, I wasn't sure whether I had the ability to pass it out at that point.
And in that case, if we can hand it around and just, I'll take a quick question, if I may, to Mr. Elzinga. With the discussion on usage, would that be additional? Take one and pass it along. You don't get them all. Would that incorporate additional staff time to accommodate the numbers for usage each year to be put forward in budget discussions?
So, Mr. Chair, if that's a question I will try my best to answer. And back to Director Sebring's comments, my understanding was that Nanaimo did the usage study every 5 years. It may have been every 2 years, but it may have been every 5 years. The total cost of Phase 1 and Phase 2, because we grouped those RFPs together, was $70,000. But I'm going to guesstimate that a facility use study is in the ballpark of $30,000, and that's just a rough guess. And I would suggest every 5 years. The further note that I would put on, Nanaimo has not seen a significant difference in usage and has done the usage study 3 times now. So they're contemplating whether or not the usage study is still relevant.
Thank you for that. I will return to my speakers list. I just thought we would ask that question while we were handing that out. Would you like a couple of minutes to peruse this before I return to my list? Give you a couple of minutes to look at that. And I'll thank Director Smith for providing this. Thank you. It's within the appendix that was handed out. You may do a follow-up, yes.
Just to follow up on this, basically the usage was brought forward from the usage data that was in only that funding scenario, and then the funding percentage was brought forward from the proposed funding for option F. So it brings it closer together to understand the usage percentage and then the funding under option F. And it just helps us have a look based on the colors of the funding is higher with the red color than the usage, and then the funding is less than the usage in the yellow. It's fairly straightforward. It just brought 2 documents, so it's much easier to see the difference for that. And I did make a note in regards to North Cowichan. The North Cowichan has a bit of a sub-region situation with a north end and a south end. And so in regards to 2 of the facilities, there needed to be a note made in the reflection of the participation in the funding or not participation in the funding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to talk about process here because I've heard it many times that there are a lot of believers in process here, and I'm a little bit confused here, and I'm sure that there's lots of people who are going to put me straight here. Mr. Elzinga started off with way background, so let's emulate that approach. Going back to Resolution 18-232, 27th of April 2018, which said, it was moved and seconded that a framework for a sub-regional services committee structure be prepared for consideration by the board. That resolution was never, ever carried out. There was no staff report, so I fail to understand at the moment how we can move forward on this when a resolution which, and we've checked with legislative services, which was valid in wording and valid at the time, which has never been acted upon, can now be just forgotten about. We needed to do that, we needed the staff report, and we need to act on that resolution before anything could move forward. And yet we're moving forward without that resolution being carried out. One of the other things I've heard is that, oh, well, that was 15 months ago. We can revoke that. What is the point of making a resolution which was never carried out and then just brushing it aside by saying we can revoke that? That's not the way the process works. And if we're going to make resolutions which can easily be brushed aside at any time because it's over 15 months old, there is something wrong with the way that this board has done business here. That resolution needs to be looked at again before we start discussing all these changes. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, through to Director Wilson, as I said in the presentation, the sub-regional services committees were not created. I'm unaware why that is, that resolution has not been acted upon.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you. Yeah, this is, I think you're right, Director Kuhn, third time round. I attended as many of the workshops as possible. Yeah, there's a lot of time and effort has gone into this, and my taxpayers will come out of any change to scenario in pretty good shape, and so, you know, it doesn't matter which model here. It just about doesn't matter which model here. I think that there's two things that drove this process from the last in this last iteration. One being fairness in general for those areas that weren't paying sufficiently towards any number of different facilities. But the main driver, as I recall, and I love to be corrected if I'm wrong in this, is that it was the aquatic center, it was fairness in the operators being fairly compensated based on use, and there wasn't going to be a model that was going to fully disperse the costs amongst all of the users, but I think there was a sincere drive to have areas that weren't contributing contribute some. And I will contend today that my electoral area contributes $4,700. It's a token amount, and I think it would be reasonable for the taxpayers of my area to contribute more. I think, though, we're addressing this huge, complex issue, but its genesis started with the aquatic center and a reasonable contribution towards that by the users that used it. And there are questions of governance, of decision-making and the likes that I think are still at the forefront. One of the things that was clear in a lot of the workshops is that we do have models that are in place today that are working. And Cowichan Lake Recreation is one of those models. We have a municipality and 2 electoral areas that operate that function, and to some extent, even some of the numbers that we deal with there aren't included in this because we've only got the one facility that is allocated in this. But I'm wondering out loud if we could maintain the status quo but address the inequity in funding for the aquatic center, and whether or not that might be a solution to our broader regional recreation issue, is address the aquatic center and maintain the status quo, because I'm quite comfortable with the operation of our sub-regional function in Cowichan Lake Recreation, even though North Cowichan users are predominant users of our facility. I think that I'm comfortable in the status quo as far as that goes. But it's clear that this major facility in the core here, the aquatic center, it's a high cost item, and I think fair contribution to that by users is appropriate. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Director Yanni DiNardo. You're going to follow that.
Yes, and also Area D has always been the challenge because they've been quite generous. And, but I think the fairness part of it, the usage, listening to Director Sebring and Wet Nanaimo, if there's something that's out there that's already working, I think that we really need to look at it in that way so that it won't be so controversial. It's something you can defend. And I think that that's the way to go in usage. And I'm not sure the status quo, yeah, it's once again extremely complicated, and I'm not sure where it's going, and it is the third time around for some of us, so it's quite frustrating, but I'd like to see something with the usage.
Thank you, Director Stone.
Deja vu. Yeah, you know, I think the most defensible position is clearly usage. And I think that if Nanaimo's considering whether it's true or not, but abandoning it because they've been analyzing it and it's stayed consistent, then I think that you could, in the future, decide whether or not you want to continue with the analysis. But if there was any resolution to support some kind of a usage-based funding model, I think it would have to come attached with at least some analysis over the next, whether it's 2 years or 4 years or whatever, but say over the next 5 years, maintain an analysis of usage. If there's some consistency, a future board could decide to no longer spend that expenditure. But in the whole hierarchy of the spend on recreation, that analysis would be less costly than it would be those 0.00001 or whatever of the full funding cost for the region. And also, I think what we would probably find is some consistency over time that would give us some formulas. I think there's a lot of different models around the province. Some regional funding models are just based on assessment across the entire region. Everybody pools the money together, and they, you know, what we're supposed to do when we come to this table, all work together for the greater good of the entire region. And I know how difficult that is to do, especially when historically the gaps tend to widen and then it's a huge change to make any change. I really liked the model that was put forward at the end there. We could spend a lot of money if we could save $390,000 a year, but I don't feel like that's fair. I also don't think that it's fair that the Cowichan Lake sports folks do pay a significant cost. They did that through referendum, and I know the directors have said, hey, listen, you know, we can deal with that. I know, speaking with our staff, our council, and you know, specifically with Area G's Parks and Rec member on our committee, our staff remarked how great their contribution is. And I think that if you look at especially how our new advisory committee is set up, they put great information through to our council makes those decisions, and to date I don't think we've not supported any recommendations that have come to us, and that harkens back to an earlier agenda item. So, you know, I think the most defensible position is to support a usage model. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I think it's difficult for people to look at the numbers and realize that in some cases, the impact is quite dramatic. And I just wonder if there was an institution of something like that, that it could be phased in over a number of years, because for any region, whether you have a great sized assessment pool or not, you know, swings of several $100,000 or even a few $100,000 are very difficult to stomach. And I've seen in the past when we've made major changes that we'd phase in changes to that funding. And to be clear with the entire board, under a usage analysis, you know, $71,000 isn't nothing to the town of Ladysmith, but it's 1%, less than 1% of our annual budget. So it's, I don't feel like in this case, there's any big drive in Ladysmith to change the funding model. I know that there is in certain pods within the regional district, but I'm just trying and remove the sort of emotionality of the numbers that we see and just be honest about it. And the most defensible position would be based on use, track it over a period of future time to be determined by the board. Future boards could decide whether they need to continue with that based on the analysis, and then phase it in over a number of years. And I think we could have something that would actually maybe put this to bed, hopefully for forever.
Forever, just a short
Until we
nap.
build a new facility.
Mr. Elzinga would like to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to Director Stone. So just to re-clarify my earlier comments, the information I got on Nanaimo doing the usage study every 5 years was verbally presented to me by the consultant. So I don't have any verification of that fact. That's the best knowledge I have in putting that forward. But I do want to speak to the phasing in, because the consultant did put in the report some recommendations around phasing, recognizing that the impacts were significant. And so that is spoken to in the report. Thank you.
One follow-up, and then Mr. Kieber.
Yeah, and I just have to say, I know it's difficult, but I think it's hard for, and I'm going to say especially the municipality of North Cowichan, to consider to shoulder that burden for the rest of the region. I think it is, we have to be really honest with ourselves, regardless of I want to keep my taxes down. It's indefensible, and it's frankly, as Director Kuhn said, I think it's immoral for the region to expect that North Cowichan would shoulder a $6 million or $5.8 million a year recreation budget, and that we all benefit from. I know that all of our kids that play hockey don't have a place to play in Ladysmith, so they play in North Cowichan or in Lake Cowichan. So I think we have to be fair and say this is defensible, and basically pay for what we use as individual areas within the region.
Mr. Kieber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the phasing in is going to be a little bit difficult. I haven't read the report where John's talking about it, but for us to do something based on usage, and I think it's a good proposal. We would have to go out and get public assent for the new service level. You don't phase that in. You'd have to ask the public to the maximum what they'd be willing to pay. We could actually phase it in over a period of time, the actual taxation of it, but the asking of the people would have to be to the max amount that would ultimately be required.
Thanks for that clarification. It would be the direction of the board to phase it in each budgetary year. Thank you. Director Kuhn.
Yes, I would, to get back to what Director Morrison said, and I kind of agree that could be a possibility to just kind of take out the aquatic center and deviate off. My fear is it's not going to do it, because there's other inequities. All you have to do is look at that sheet. If the sheet on the basis of use, there's a whole pile of inequities there. And if we just take the aquatic center out, there'll be others. And before you know, years down the road, the issue will come up again, because some people will be dissatisfied and say, well, we're not willing to pay for that facility because we are not using it. So I can't see making this kind of half-cocked kind of compromise to face the same problem again, let's say, in another 6 or 8 years, because over time, it's not going to satisfy everybody. And based on use, it's the logical thing, and it's fair to everybody, and it's defensible. And that will settle it for a long, long time. All we need is, yes, we need updated surveys, and we need to find out, has the population shifted or whatever. That is all sidelines, but the whole system in use, I think it would solve a lot of problems.
Thank you. Alternate Director Duncan, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not support two-tier, and I feel that usage is the fair way to deal with it. And I don't know if I've got a conflict because I got an annual pool pass.
I think we've all partaken in that. Thanks for the levity there. Alternate Director C. Alternate Director C. It's been a long day already.
Me?
Director Sebring, you're not an alternate.
No, not today. I want to come back to Director Wilson's point about Resolution 18232. And I appreciate that procedurally the case can be made that we're off base here because we haven't acted on that, and that was the previous board direction. And I'm wondering, and I would look to our corporate services person, would a motion at this point to rescind Resolution 18232 just to clear the table so that we can legitimately be having this discussion and not continuously be reminded of the fact that, you know, we were going to set up this sub-regional recreation committee structure and that we haven't done it. So we just clear the deck so we can start fresh. Would a motion like that be appropriate?
I have Mr. Kieber going to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the thought for the sub-regional services was not sub-regional recreation, it was sub-regional services. The idea at the time was to put a number of different services that were locally charged to one committee. It wasn't just for recreation. At the time, the board couldn't decide on the regional funding, so they chose to refer that issue to that committee that was going to be created in the future. But the idea at the time came from staff was not to create that committee just for recreation. There was ideas about grouping in parks discussions or planning discussions or whatever issues were relevant at the time. So,
but correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure I was at that meeting as an alternate back then. This recommendation rolled out of the discussion about regional recreation, and that's the perception that many of us are dealing with here, is that recommendation was the way we were going to finally crack this regional recreation nut. I'm sensing around this table that this board has a different take on it, and that if we were to take a vote right now, we might well go to the usage model. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but in order to do that, should we strike Resolution 18232?
So perhaps clarification from Ms. Legault on that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that's certainly the option of the committee, but a motion could be entertained to rescind Resolution 18232.
I'll make that motion if I can get a seconder.
So motion to rescind and a seconder.
You've had a couple of seconders over here.
Yeah, I've got like half the table, so I'm going to make a separate list on this topic. Did you want to speak to it? Are you sure? Okay. Anyone else wish to speak on the rescinding motion? I have Director Smith.
With regards to rescinding, on the 27th of April, the area director for Area G, Mel Dory, wrote to the community, members of the community, indicating that we did not choose option F. In the end, recreation will be sent to a sub-regional, hear that? In the end, recreation will be sent to a sub-regional committee to review funding, etc. For us, this means going to a committee in North, composed of Aaron Stone, Mary Marquardt, and myself to hammer out a new funding formula in support of Frank Jameson Center. To me, that's what was the takeaway by a director who sat at this table. I have watched those videos and I have listened. I sat here for the whole 4-hour meeting as the general public, and I do not think that we can rescind a resolution that was made at that time and feel good about it, because it's been 15 months that there has been no action taken to move that along. We're 9 months into a new board and no action has been taken. This is a resolution that was made at the time regarding recreation. It was at a special board meeting only dealing with recreation. And so to say that it is to do with some other committee that we will be forming and it'll be sent other things, that's not the direction that came out of that meeting. And I would not be able to support rescinding it after it has been sitting there for 15 months and us sitting here for 9 months. I can't support it.
Thank you. Director Stone's next.
Ooh, perfect. So anyway, there's et cetera in there that Mel said, and the et cetera was that it was supposed to be more than just recreation, and that was clearly a part. We could replay the video, you were here the whole time, but there was a broader discussion around, wait a minute, there are more regional issues or sub-regional issues than just recreation, and that we should talk about them. I actually think these are these are not required necessarily, the rescinding of this motion, to discuss the funding issue. The striking of a sub-regional committee, I think, is absolutely a great idea. Now, whether we rescind this or not doesn't mean we can't make a future motion that's more relevant to the direction and nature of this board. And 15 months, 9 months, I would argue that we're 9 months into this term and we haven't moved a lot of things along because we've had to backtrack quite a bit on previous work for many years in the past. Because specifically, there's a hesitancy to move forward with some of the new members of the board, and that's just the reality, and that's, in my mind, acceptable. We had some significant change. Some of the new board members have significantly different views than their predecessors, and as a nature of that, it does impede progress. I've had conversations with people in the greater region and said, geez, you know, things aren't really moving forward like they used to, and I said, it's a new board, give everybody some time and we'll see it move forward, I think, once we get through some of the storming before we get into more of a normal period of making progress on issues. We have this quite often via our email threads or at this table where we can re-argue issues that were long ago decided, never make a change to the direction, but we did spend that time sort of rehashing those issues. So I'm not in favor of doing that. I don't think we need to rescind this. I'll listen to the rest of the board. But I think that the funding discussion can be settled if there's an appetite to do so. But I would still like to have some sub-regional committees and us to look at collaborating more. It doesn't have to be, there's this thing we're going to have to hammer out a deal with Ladysmith. I think there's good partnership opportunities between Ladysmith and Area G and Area H that don't require hammering out any deals. It's about collaborating, cooperating, and making people's lives better, not trying to argue over pennies when we're ignoring some of the dollars that are on the table and opportunities that are on the table. So as far as this rescinding resolution, I don't think it's required to settle the funding question, but I think that we should have those groups getting together and trying to make good decisions for our whole community, like our Parks Rec Advisory Commission does with members of Area G and H. Make good recommendations to the council, whether we bring that under the guise of the CVRD to help direct what happens at FJCC and our parks. The reverse would be true. If we wanted to do that, then Area G and H parks would be under some influence of the town of Ladysmith because it would have to be a reciprocal relationship. If you want influence over town of Ladysmith facilities and parks and recreation opportunities, then you also have to give up that influence to the town of Ladysmith in your areas as well. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you. Unless I'm mistaken, I think it's the same under the charter here as it is at municipalities, which is that no future board has the right, no past board has, or council has the right to fetter a decision of the future board. Is that right? So, yeah, in April of 2016, there was a motion passed. I think we could do a number of things. We could rescind it. That doesn't mean we couldn't bring it back. or we could just, like, listening to the dialogue here today, I was feeling really excited because I've been on the periphery of this a couple of times as a director once and as an alternate director once, when Director Hartman wasn't well and I spent a lot of time at the board. And I feel that this is a very exciting moment, that it seems like the majority of speakers are saying it makes sense, it's defensible, it's the ethical and integrous thing to do, which is to have user pay. So that's pretty exciting. This other thing, I just think it's kind of a bit of a red herring right now and not really necessary to focus on it. And so perhaps new directors didn't know that. I certainly didn't know that when I started. Yes, a council and a board is a continuous thing, but it's also a bunch of new people that can revisit anything, and they can change just about anything if they want to. So I think I'd like to see us either, if it's really important to people to rescind it, get that vote out of the way, or decide to defeat that and see where we are on user pay, and then ask our staff, if it passes, to come back and give us the report of what that looks like. That would be my recommendation, because it's almost 4 when we have another meeting that should be starting, and
If we can stay on the topic at hand, please. We'll deal with the
Sorry.
usage later. Thank you. Director Kuhn?
Well, I
That's on the rescinding motion, please.
Yes.
Stay to that.
I wonder, do we want to do away with that motion now, or do we?
That's on the
I-
floor right now to rescind that motion? Yes.
Okay.
Moved and seconded.
I would like to make a motion after that one.
Okay, Director Smith, you're next. Director Wilson. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Well, no. You have glasses, he doesn't. Oh,
Yeah.
I apologize. I may have crossed the code of conduct there.
I'll get him later. First of all, on the motion to rescind it, I have heard many times as a new director that we have to respect the opinions and the decisions of the previous board. I've lost track of the number of times that I've heard that. And here you go saying, well, you know, the previous board didn't really mean that, and we could change this by doing this, that, and the other. That's what it sounds like to me. All right, fair enough. Let's go and rescind it. But this is setting a dangerous precedent here, a very dangerous precedent, because you can make decisions now, you can make resolutions now, which will be forgotten, and eventually somebody will say, didn't really mean that. Sorry, I'm very troubled about this, and I'm not trying to cause a blockage here. What I'm saying is, I've been told, respect the decisions of the previous. I've been told that the procedure is everything, and all of a sudden, professionally, that seems to be going out the window, and I don't like it one little bit.
Thank you very much. Director Sebring.
Thank you. As a mover, I'd hopefully like to close this and call the question in a minute.
Thank you.
This is to me a procedural question, and that is, because Director Wilson, you raised the matter of, is this funding formula properly before us, given previous direction from the board to do this sub-regionally? And I'm saying, let's legitimize the discussion about the funding model by removing all doubt about that previous resolution. And yes, a board does have the authority to rescind a previous decision. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the question. I don't know if
Are you ready for the question? It's to rescind, recommend to the board that it be rescinded. Which motion was that again? Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was Board Resolution 18-232 from the April 27th, 2018 special board meeting.
Just wanted to clarify that. All those in favor of rescinding? Opposed? Keep your hands up. Director Smith, Director Wilson, Director Nicholson. It does pass. It is rescinded. Now I'm going to recommend to the board for it's rescinded by this committee. How's that? So that'll go to the board. I'm going to return to my list on the funding formulary. I'll put you on the list. Director Wilson.
I'm in favour of the user pay. I think that's the only fair and defensible way to go.
Well, thank you very much. Director Smith.
Yes, I agree. User pay is a user system that's been presented is agreeable for our area, and I think that it suits the CVRD as a region. The one thing I would like to make a comment on the funding formula for pay-or-use is that anything that's 2% or under in the pay-or-use, I can't find which one it is quickly, but if anything, it's option A, anything that's 2% or under should be removed, and the reasoning is that the data that was collected, there is a plus or minus 4% on the data that was collected. It's in the document that is probably at the bottom of my pile here, but I could pull it out if anybody requires it. So I think if we err on the side of 2%, anything that's under 2% is removed. So if an area, for example, if you take the Frank Jameson and Area C uses it 0.2%, then it would be removed, and that any area that's use is under 2%, that would be within the data error situation. And I think that if that was done, I would be able to easily move the user system along funding scenario.
Thank you. I have Director Salmon.
Mr. Chair, I'm somewhat persuaded by the user argument, even though it's quite costly for Area A, but I just would like to ask Mr. Elzinga a bit more detail on how the usage figures are determined, since it's may be very important, and just maybe through one example here on the option A, I see that apparently residents of Area A use the Cowichan Lake Recreation Center more than the Cowichan Aquatic Center. And I was surprised to see that, but I'll let Mr. Elzinga answer.
To the director, through the chair. So I don't have the information on the engagement models in front of me, but there was a significant use of students at the doors of facilities to record which jurisdiction was using that particular facility. So that was over a 3 to 4 month period, I believe, to identify specifically usage. And so there was usage for programs. So that data was collected from each of the individual recreation facilities that collects that data. There was surveys done by those students at the door to collect the information as people walked in for drop-in programs. And there was contact made with user groups for who their members are, and that was determined by the number of particular time periods they used in each facility. So all of that was determined over a 3 or 4 month period.
Follow up?
And can you hazard a guess why would there be more Area A users of?
If I had to hazard a guess for more Area A users in Cowichan Lake, that's primarily because in 2017, Kerry Park Minor Hockey had a fairly large registration base that was not accommodated completely within the Kerry Park Recreation Center. I don't know the date of the Shawnigan Lake facility on the Shawnigan Lake School as to when it was built, but thinking back, I know that Kerry Park Minor Hockey used the Cowichan Lake Arena fairly extensively for their programs.
As do a number of other jurisdictions. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to, I don't think the status quo is okay. We need to make this fair, and Area E is going to take a large hit no matter which option we choose. What I'm concerned about, though, is the governance model that's going to go along with this, because we have really appreciated being a part of the Island Savings Commission, and we contribute a lot of money to the Island Savings Commission. if we are going to be investing in other recreation facilities, and I need to make sure there's a governance model that's going to work for us, because we need to continue to make sure things are fair and that investments are made wisely. And so I sort of see the two things going hand in hand, and I'd like to have a discussion about the governance.
Mr. Kieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to be fair, I think from staff's perspective, the committee has moved a lot further than we had anticipated. So my thought is, without even discussion with Mr. Elzinga, is that if the committee wishes to go to a user pay model, that give that direction to staff, and staff would come back with a more detailed report about what that would look like, what would it include, and you can ask all the detailed questions on just that one topic, usage, and if you want governance in there, you can that can be part of it as well.
Thank you. I still have a speakers list. Are you done, Director Nicholson? I'm sorry. Alternate Director Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that when we do the analysis of usage, that it's done annually for at least the first 2 years, possibly even 3 years, before we move to a further spread with usage. So,
Thank you for that comment. Director Stone?
Yeah, I would just like us to, if we can, I think there's really good points here. The governance thing, sub-regional discussions around recreation. I think we need to separate that, though. Let's deal with the funding question and then move on to a discussion. I think, frankly, if we can solve this today, we should all, go celebrate after. But then we should actually sit down. I think if we can lift that burden off of us, we can come back to this table, whether it's a workshop with Mr. Elzinga. We've got a strategic plan that's been put out there. We've got a lot of things to build on if we can remove the funding question and that burden. And start sitting down, talking about the governance, because I know that we're going to see a lot of money going different ways. But I think what may be a spin-off of that is if you look at these, look at from a governance, and we have citizen volunteers that want to feel engaged. You know that the hockey family that is in Ladysmith right now that doesn't have any connection or involvement with the hockey arenas that they go to might feel more invested and involved as a volunteer. We might actually get some really positive outcomes out of it. So I'm just saying, maybe we could do something like give some direction. I assume that if we gave direction for staff to report back to the board on what, they would provide a report to us on the impacts of a usage-based funding model. And then also maybe set up some kind of a workshop where the board can get back together, talk about governance, talk about some of the other pieces that sort of orbit around that core discussion around funding.
Thank you. Director Marsh?
Yes, I really like what I heard Director Stone say. And I'm wondering if the board is ready for a motion. And if so, I'd like to move that the committee recommend to the board that we adopt a user pay system for our recreation,
Option A.
User-based. Thank you. Someone want to think they have a word better? Go ahead.
He's got one written down.
Okay.
Will you give up the mic for that?
Absolutely.
Then I will move to Mr. Sebring.
Thank you. I would make a motion that this committee recommend to the board that we approve in principle funding option A, the user-based funding model, and that staff report back on governance options and options for phasing in that funding model.
Second. I won't even have to ask if I have a second. You're going to discuss this? I knew it. You got the look?
We have another meeting starting in 2 minutes.
We have another meeting in 2 minutes, so I'm going to... You want me to call the question? This has been going on since '68. I don't think another 30 seconds is going to hurt it. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? I don't believe it. So I'm proud to say that as the previous chair of a regional recreation committee that only lasted one meeting, I am here again to witness this, in principle, and I'm glad he added that. Director Stone.
And I know this is really superfluous. Sorry, I just want to say, both to the committee chair from the previous work and the previous board, and more to this group, it's just like, I feel like we just had some kind of real psychological breakthrough. And I hope that when we leave this room, though, I hope that we can actually build on this, because I think this could be a really cool turning point for this group and this board. And if we can take that goodwill and move it into discussions about sub-regional governance or regional governance, I think we can actually do some really good things. So hopefully we can support each other as we move forward and really collaborate and do good things for the region.
Just so we're aware, we're not done this agenda yet. But we are running over on time.
Actually, the next meeting doesn't start till 4:30.
4:30. Okay, let's see if we can. Thank you, Mr. Elzinga,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
and to those that worked on this, a big thanks to them as well. Ms. Legault, I believe we're on R6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R6, Director's Report from Director Wilson regarding Parks and Trails information, and the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, number one, that the allocation of staff time to compile the total current number of parks / areas and trails that are owned and or maintained by the CVRD as outlined in the Director's Report to the Community Services Committee on August 14th, 2019 be approved. And two, that this type of data is continually monitored, updated, and made part of the asset management rule.
Director Wilson.
I'm moving the motion, moving the resolution, rather.
Okay.
Yep.
Moved. Do I have a seconder? Moved and seconded. Do I have some discussion on this? Mr. Wilson.
What's happened here is that I went into, this is background, I went into the Parks Department on the website looking for information on what we've actually got in terms of the number of parks, etc. Those reports stopped in 2015 and has not been updated. I was pointed towards the CVRD annual reports and they're not there either. So from 2015, there appears to be no data as to how many parks we've got, how many acres we've got, and how many kilometers of trails that we've got. So, cut a long story short, I was eventually told or requested to write a director's report, because this kind of historical, complicated or complex information would require staff time. And that really, I don't understand why a basic piece of managerial data, such as how many parks have we got, is not readily available. It's not right. And I'm going to hark back to what the questions I asked Maya, the student. She's got all the information. They've got lists of information. And yet I'm being pushed from pillar to post and having to write director's reports for a piece of information that really should be readily available on the website. How many parks do we have? It's not that difficult. And then, and I must admit, I'm getting more and more frustrated with this kind of thing where, is it really necessary to have to go through this? In fact, I could almost have gone to a freedom of information and I would have probably had it in 30 days. I had to write this on the 13th of July. It's now the 14th of August, and I still don't have the information that I require. It's not difficult. Let's have the information. Why isn't it there? It's pretty basic, and that's why I'm asking for this, and I still don't understand how a student can have the information, and I have to ask for it for staff time to be.
Okay, Mr. Keebert to reply.
Attempt to reply. So what Director Wilson is referring to is the fact that staff are getting inundated with requests from a number of the elected officials, and it's bogging down the work that the staff are doing. It's my understanding that Mr. Crothers is going to be talking to the board on the 28th about this issue. It gets to the point where some divisions are basically stopping their day-to-day work and to deal with some of the staff's or elected officials' requests. I know from my perspective, I've been acting in Mr. Carruthers' position for the last 2 weeks, and when I first got into it, I had about 5 email chains of staff working on different things that have been requested by the board. One particular had 11 different staff working on it. So it bogs down the system. So I believe, so that's probably why the request was given to Mr. Wilson, that so the board is aware of the requests that are coming forward. I do know that Mr. Carruthers will be talking to the board on the 28th about this issue. I'm not sure what he's going to be saying, but I do know that's something that he wants to be talking to the board about.
Thank you. Director Stone.
I'll support this because I think that this might not be the best example to highlight the concern about requests for volumes of information. But we have, we go through this municipally at times too, where there's just, whether it's an issue comes up in the community or we get, one of our council or myself get an email and here we go, I'm asking for all this historical data and everything, and staff goes, wait a minute, we're trying to meet deadlines on a lot of big things right now. Can we put this on an agenda in the future? You bring it to Municipal Services, which is our committee of the whole, and talk about it with your council and see if council will approve it. So that happens. This might not be the best example of that, but I think it's a cumulative effect of many, many, many different requests. But I think that in this case, I think that this information, and as soon as you asked those questions, having read this agenda, I was like, he's prepping for the agenda, his director's report. So I do support this. I think we need to have that information. Obviously, if we've done the GIS work, we should be able to quickly pull up the number of parks, how many miles or kilometers, sorry, of trail, and so on and so forth. And I think that is important information, so moving forward, we should maintain that, and hopefully we can maintain that information based on the GIS work that's done. So this may not be the best example of sort of voluminous information that's been required, but maybe it's a cumulative impact. But I absolutely support this, and I think that maybe the bigger discussion around how we manage requests from our group of elected officials would be better saved for when our CAO is back. So no judgment here. I know we've got a lot of information. I've been trying to get information from my own staff for Director Smith around our recreation budget. I know you're doing the same. And it is a lot of work. So I know municipally what we've done. I forgot to mention this. I talked to Director Morrison. We actually let our councillors know what pay grade they're at and give them a rough estimate of the cost of their request, because a single request from a member of council can actually cost several $1,000s when you have senior staff members sourcing out information in the midst of their workflow. If you spend 7 or 8 hours of a senior level staff person's time, it can cost quite a bit. So anyway, I will support this resolution, and then maybe we can have a bigger discussion with CAO Carruthers when he gets back.
I have a speakers list. Are you okay calling the question? Or did you wish to speak, Director Marsh? Oh, carry on.
So I'm next?
You are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I won't be supporting the motion today because I prefer to have motions like this that come from a director's point of view to be a notice of motion, because I think if it was a notice of motion when Mr. I'm sorry? Okay, it's hard for me to talk when you talk, when I'm talking. So if it was a notice of motion, it came to the 28th, then we would have the whole explanation of how and when it could happen. I mean, I've looked on the website. I can see, I don't know if I have all the data that Director Wilson is looking at, but the parks are all listed, what they're called is listed. Well, I think, anyway, the reason I won't support it at this point is I have seen a number of times in this 9 months, and I can see people going, oh, don't say it, Kate, because we just did this great victory. But I have seen people take an awful lot of time on things that I think is not a good idea to do without, and I would like to see our CAO be here when we have the discussion on whether to go ahead with this particular thing.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo, are you okay? Thank you. Director Kuhn, are you okay?
Well,
No, that's a personal question. Are you okay?
Yes, I am just
Excellent.
fine.
Carry on.
Thank you. Yes, I'm so delighted that you worry about me, man. I mean, that's makes me feel really important. I would suggest we push this off until we have the discussion on the 28th, because it all blends into that. And I think there's a problem that has arisen, and I would much rather leave this until we have this discussion on the 28th.
Thank you. Director Smith?
I support this. I think that it should be something that we already have available to us on the website or within some sort of document that the communities can look at for it should be easily accessible. One of the things that I think is important is that electoral area directors, the staff are people that we rely on for our parks, for our engineering, for our land use, and that sometimes we email questions to the managers of those areas to ask for direction or how to clarify something for us. And unfortunately, we're not a municipality, and we need to ask questions. If we're not allowed to ask questions, then it seems like we're being gagged from seeking information.
So to the motion, you are supporting it?
To the motion, I support the motion.
Thank you very much. Are we ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Alternate Director Duncan, Director Marsh, Director Kuhn, Director Morrison are all opposed. It passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and moving to unfinished business.
Next, Ms. Legault.
E1, and the recommendation is to refer the report from the Parks and Trails Division to the September 11th, 2019 Community Services Committee meeting.
Moved and duly seconded. Thanks for doing that. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Guess what? Ms. Legault? I believe it's question period?
Yes, question period. Questions can be addressed to the chair. Thank you.
Thank
Welcome.
you, everybody. Oh, I had turned just, okay, thank you, everybody. I have a question that arose from this recreation information. Could someone explain why there's a north end of North Cowichan and a south end of North Cowichan and how they fund differently?
Mr. Kieber will try to answer that for you.
I like to say I live in South North Cowichan. I pay for everything, but I won't say that. North Cowichan has broken up their municipality into two different areas. So when the community center was first created, this goes way back, the referendum was for the south end to build this rec facility. So the north never was a participant. So I believe it's somewhere just north or around Maze Road, and south participate in the Cowichan or the Island Savings Center. And the north doesn't participate in it. They do contribute in the form of a grant to the theater, but they don't participate. So that's the dividing line between north and south. And that is
So the funding that everybody's tentatively agreed to here based on usage, they will get caught up in that usage funding as well? They're not going to get separated and not have to pay?
So my understanding is usage is for the entire CVRD, so they will be paying their share based on usage, just like everybody else.
Okay, that's great. And one other thing, if you don't mind. As a resident of Cobble Hill, we support through a grant, through a referendum-approved grant for the Cobble Hill Community Center. So that's not on the list because that's a I don't know why it's not on the list, but that's our community center that we're funding. So the proposed funding will, we now have to support Shawnigan Lake Community Center as well as the Cobble Hill Community Center. Is that taken into consideration in your listing?
So, Mr. Chair, none of the smaller community halls are included. There's Glenora Hall, there's Honeymoon Bay Hall, there's Misatch Lake, there's the Diamond, there's Crofton, there's a number of halls
Yeah,
that
well-
are not included. The only one that the terms of reference referred to were the 9 items that were identified.
Just
So
for
Sha-
clarification, Honeymoon Bay, Missachi, and Yubo do reside in a sub-regional formula.
So Shawnigan is identified as a separate community center
Correct,
differently than the rest of the community centers?
correct.
Any particular reason why they're identified that way?
I wasn't on the committee, so I have no idea.
Okay.
Sorry, the
Nobody
Shining Lake,
knows?
Shining Lake Community Center? Cobble Hill.
Well-
Cobble Hill Community Hall is not owned by the CVRD. It's a
No.
separate entity that we give a grant to, but they're not owned by the
Yeah, I
CVRD.
understand that. But the funding's going to draw Cobble Hill into funding Shawnigan Lake, even though we're already funding our Cobble Hill Hall. Is that correct?
Just based on usage,
But does Cobble Hill use Shawnee Lake? That's the question.
that's the question.
Based on usage. Okay, that's, you know what, that usage thing, that's the number one. Perfect.
Well, you got 2 thumbs up. There's your survey. Plus or minus 4%. Any other questions? Motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you very much. I didn't think we'd get through this. Thanks a lot.